listening to The Starting Zone, a podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to The Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft, the people who play it. Today is May 10th, 2023, and my name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host, Jason Lucas. Jason, welcome to Season 2 of Dragonflight.
Spencer, hello. Yes, welcome to you as well, and to the audience. It finally, as of yesterday, feels like the new patch. The first week is always weird because yes, there's stuff to do, and it's a good idea to push the patch out and then let stuff percolate for a week. But now we're just into it, and no matter what level you play at in terms of PvE, you're into it. You know, you can rate it all 4 difficulties this week, which is cool. It presents some problems, I think, ultimately, but it's cool to just have stuff open. They're not gating the Mythic Plus system with any kind of you have that weird ramp up week or whatever that we used to have.
That was the strangest thing. So there was the preseason week, which didn't really matter for much because loot was the same. Then there was the ramp up week where everything would, essentially end of dungeon loot was lower in item level and the reward from your chest on the following week was lower. And so it was this weird, I don't know, it was a very strange transition week. It meant the first week of Season 2 was not as exciting as the second, which was very strange.
Yeah, I think, having Mythic open the same week as Heroic is maybe not necessary, but avoiding the ramp-up week for Mythic Plus is great because, you can just get in there and do whatever you can handle this week and get rewarded for it. Obviously, our keystones decayed a lot because of the season roll and various changes they made, so if you want to get back up to a plus 20, A, it's going to be really hard because of your item level, and B, it's going to take a lot of work of pushing keys up because your key decayed 9 or 10 ranks. But yeah, it's all there. I mean, it's I think the campaign is finished now. There was a lot of campaign questing to do last week, a little bit less this week, but it's all available. So it brings you right up to the story of entering Aberrus and defeating Sarkareth. So that's cool. It's not, it's not this thing where you're getting dribs and drabs of it over the course of 4, 5, 6 weeks. You can do it kind of at your own pace at this point. So if you want to just devour it, it's all there. If you want to space it out and do bits and pieces when you feel like it or you have time, then you can do that. So that's cool. The new Renown faction, there's plenty of ways to get that rep and plenty of bonuses for it and stuff. So that's feeling good. I mean, it's weird because, Season 1 was short, right? It was only about 5 months or so.
Yeah.
But I feel like because of various things, it just felt like you needed about 2 or 3 months to get through that stuff and not 5. And it feels like everything's kind of clicking back, on. The switches are flipping everywhere. There's all kinds of new stuff to go find and do and discover and learn and figure out and master and progress your character and all that. So it's exciting, man. I mean, it's been tough. We talked about it on the show a lot about you and I have both just been super busy and stretched from work and personal life stuff. And it's cut into, us being able to do what we want to do in WoW, or having the motivation to even try in some cases, or, just really disengage a lot. And it is hard. It's hard to spin it back up, on a dime when new stuff comes out. But I'm really pleased with this patch and with this content so far. Granted, it's early days, but first impressions are really good, and I think that means a lot. If you're not interested in what they're presenting you, if the concept isn't grabbing you, if the mechanics aren't grabbing you, then that doesn't really speak too well for the future of that patch, and I'm not feeling that with this at all. I'm not really still not playing as much as I would ideally like to be, but when I am playing, I'm having a good time.
Yeah, I definitely hopped in yesterday. I was playing a little bit last week, played a little bit on Monday, hopped in a bunch yesterday during the day, and had a pretty good time just I did the LFR to do those 3 wings, get those 3 bosses in, because we're going to talk about those 3 bosses today. So I want to be sure I actually visually was like present in what that might feel like for a lot of players. And I think LFR is probably the experience most people will get first, and then obviously normal and heroic. And I know a lot of teams were clearing through normal and heroic last night. It sounded like most of the teams that I know in heroic that were not mythic teams, that aren't teams that do mythic regularly, got 4 or 5 bosses pretty, swiftly in the first night. So that is a really good sign for this raid, that people at least have fairly easy access to a good chunk of loot out of there. It's always when you hit that 3rd boss or 4th boss wall and people get stuck for, 2 weeks or something, that ends up creating a very, it's a bad sign for a raid when that happens. So people are getting 5 or 6 in there. That's great. That's a lot of loot for people. That's at least 2 tier pieces that people are getting access to. So that's great. And as far as the rest of the gameplay goes, yeah, I definitely enjoyed the loop that I did. I did the new storyline that came out yesterday. I hopped in and did all of the new storyline gives you a ton of crests. So I started digging a little more into the crest and Flightstone system that's out there. I will say I was incredibly confused when I started earning crests. I don't know if you experienced this, Jason, where they were going, because I kept looting them, and then I would be like, they're not in my bag, but they're not in my currency tab, so where are my crests going? And then I eventually was herbing and realized that my reagent bag that's dedicated for reagents had a whole bunch of crests sitting in it. And I was like, oh, okay, these go in here. Got it. Didn't realize. So let me just combine all these things together and get the bigger crests, because that's where they were all going. It was a bit of a strange experience.
There's a bit of a weird thing with the way they're distributed too, because your ultimate goal is the crest, right? And the crest you create from 15 fragments, right? And you can get the fragments from various sources, but one of the places you could get fragments from is there's some things that reward like a satchel that has fragments in it. So then you click the bag in your regular inventory, and then you open up the fragments, which go into your reagent bag. And then every time you have a multiple of 15, you click it again to then create a crest. So the upgrade system, I think, is great and super powerful and flexible and a great addition to the game. But man, some of the implementation is weird.
It's just weird because for your average player, you open the bag and you see the fragments and you loot them, and then you open your bag to see them and they're not there. And it's not until you realize they go into your reagent bag, which, don't get me wrong, I think this is a good thing. I just think it needed to be communicated somehow that these counted as reagents. And as to where they were going. So anyways, that was for those of you who are like, I've been looting all these crests and I have no idea what's going on with them, or what are all these things filling up my reagent bag. That's what this is, just so you know. That's where they're all going. Because that threw me for a bit. But anyways, that was a silly thing that happened for me that I wanted to share. But like I said, I did LFR. LFR was an interesting experience because it felt like there was a ton of trash at the first 3 bosses of this raid. Which probably was people at LFR just pulling a ton of trash packs at the same time, because that happens. That's what people do. They just 3 people go off in different directions and then all come back with friends. That's how that works.
And meanwhile, 15 people are AFK.
Right, yeah. So it did that felt very scattered and odd. And we'll talk more about the bosses when we actually get down to the boss guide stuff at the bottom. But in general, good experience. What felt bad was group loot. Really weird to kill a boss, loot the boss, see the pop-up windows, and click to roll on them and be like, yep, didn't win any of those instantly. So instant feel bad, because as much as I like the group loot system, as far as the fact that they're now giving you more information, as opposed to it being a, maybe I'll get it, maybe I won't, let's find out. It's you click need, and you look up at the group loot window, and it tells you who's winning it over you. And you're like, oh, okay, I didn't roll higher than that, I guess. So... they get the loot. I don't know. It's a weird thing. I think personal loot for LFR might have actually worked out better. And I still stand by Jason's stance of if it's a guild group entirely, you should be able to do master loot. I don't know. It's a strange sensation. I don't know what it's like for another player who hasn't been playing the game as often, to get in there and kill a boss and have the window pop up and click need and then not win something. I don't know what that experience feels like and see the group loot system that way. or someone who's experienced personal loot for an extended period of time, and that's all they've known, right? They didn't know anything before then, and it switched over to group loot, if that's a good feeling or a bad feeling. But it felt bad for me last night. That was just how I was, where I was at mentality-wise.
I mean, I think the big thing is, really, I don't understand why one size has to fit all. You can have different loot systems for different types of content and different groups approaching it, and group loot is better than personal loot for a dedicated group that's like the same 20 people every week, but it's not as good as it could be. And group loot is not as good for a LFR group or, a full pug than what we had before. So like, I don't understand why we have to have one system. Like, personal loot had to be everywhere, and now group loot has to be everywhere. And I don't think, there's some situations where it's good, and I think it's better for organized groups than what we had before, but it's not as good as it could be. It's not the best thing we've had. It's just, it's that thing of like, it's the universal choice because it makes everybody equally unhappy. Like, there's good stuff about it, right? Yeah. But it's like, it's not as odious as other things that they've done, but like, why have the same thing for every mode? LFR is not the same as a prog raid. It's just not people aren't coming for the same things. They're not coming for the same reasons. The social dynamics of the group are much different. Let's have different rules to fit the needs of the group.
Agreed. But you must have dived into the campaign a bit yesterday as well.
I did. I finished up the campaign, and I really liked the story that they're telling. I think the Black Dragon characters are very compelling, and really, we obviously we met Rathian back in Mists of Pandaria, but it was in Legion where we met Abyssi and Ebonhorn that I really thought that they were starting to plant some interesting seeds there, and that was a character I really responded to.
The one character I can stand to be around, yes.
Right, yeah.
Three of them.
Right. So to see that stuff really kind of pay off in this patch, and the whole thing about sort of uncovering, Neltharion secrets and all this, I like the way it was presented. I think it sets up this whole patch and the season really well. I was feeling that increased mob health in a bunch of these campaign quests. I don't do a lot of damage. More than I used to do, I guess. But like, I felt like I was beating on stuff forever, soloing it in prot spec, and just nothing was going anywhere. So that was a little weird. I think maybe like when you put new stuff in, I assume that like the mobs in Zaralik have more health than the 10.0 mobs anyway.
It should.
So then like the mob scaling plus the extra 25% global, it's just like, man, I'm beating on this quest mob for a long time. But finished up yesterday and got my Slither Drake, which is a super cool looking dragon model. I love it. It's a little bit more petite, I guess, than like the Highland Drake or something that I have been using. But it's really long. It's like very serpentine, and its default color is like a black dragonflight dragon, which is cool because otherwise you have to like do the rep grinds to unlock the Highland Drake. So if you didn't want to do that, but you think riding like a black dragonflight dragon is cool, then that's a nice bonus just for doing the questing. So yeah, and I've been going around trying to do the world quests and do the snail racing dailies and all that stuff, trying to get my rep up with the snail guy. I like the fact that there's a more regular world quest rotation. I mean, when semi-weekly world quests came out in 10.0, there was some initial talk of turning on daily world quests. Everybody went, no. And maybe that's the correct call for a brand new expansion, and you have like 4 zones at once. We have one zone now that is really the focus of the gameplay. And I think having like 1 day long world quests and 2 and 3 day long world quests are fine, because I want reasons to revisit the space and to explore stuff in it and to do stuff. So,
well, it's the zone that we're going to be living in, right? So it's that case of, if there is something where you knock it all out in 1 day and then you have 2 days of nothing, it does have that feeling of, well, what am I going to do with my time? If you're just on during the day without, there being a lot of other people around or people you normally want to run groups with, you end up in that situation. So yeah, having at least 4 or 5 quests that are dailies is a nice feeling. So you can actually hop in and be able to engage in those on a daily basis and feel like there's a reason to be inside of the zone that is the new zone.
Yeah, I'm really happy with having, a more frequent rotation on the world quests, and it gives me a reason to log in, do stuff, do some mining, right? Like fill that out and have some mats on hand, and they made gathering like actually really fun in this expansion because there's so much texture to it, and as you skill up, you can get some really cool stuff from mining. So having an excuse to go fly around in a space where I can mine is awesome.
Yeah.
So last night we stepped into Aberrus normal mode to get a feel for the space and start looking at the bosses. And I learned my lesson a long time ago with my group and our schedule and our approach that starting with heroic prog is not the correct answer. We need to see all the fights and we need to figure everything out and work our way up and take all the low-hanging fruit first.
Right.
And now, especially we're back in a world where we have set pieces that drop. That's a lot of power. It doesn't make sense to leave that on the table just because of a small item level discount. We have unique raid loot that can be very powerful. So we got in there last night and we were just hauling ass through the place. It felt great. We got 7 bosses down on normal in like 90 minutes flat. And these are all first looks. I'm kind of just, explaining stuff to people on the fly as we go through. And the bosses, I think, like the place is amazing looking. It looks like it gives me kind of like Blackwing Lair kind of vibes a little bit. Blackwing Descent, it's that it's this definite successor to those Black Dragon raids of yore. But just obviously like it looks like a Dragonflight raid. So the graphics are really nice, but the overall design is just really cool, really evocative of what you expect from like a Black Dragon themed WoW raid, right? I think so from the stuff I've seen so far.
Yeah.
The new VFX and stuff they did for Shadowflame all look really cool and really unique. Like it looks like a different thing than we've seen before when it comes to the spell effects. Like it's the same. It reads well, right? There's the Soki circle with the spike in it. There's the swirlies. There's the drop off damage. It's that vocabulary that we know about WoW, but the flourish of the Shadow Flame, like orange and purple kind of thing coming together gives it a different vibe. It does make it look unique and it fits with the story and it fits with the whole atmosphere of the raid so well, I think. So really strong impressions from, aesthetically from stepping into the raid. And I thought the bosses were really fun. Like boss tuning felt great for, now my group, I think I had like 26 maybe 27 people in the group last night. So turnout was pretty good. Bigger group than they really tend to, tweak the fights for in this day and age. And a lot of people were rolling in with, 4-piece mythic item level, 415 plus, 419, 420 equipped, whatever, which is outgearing basically the entire place or almost. And so as you'd expect, like a bunch of stuff just kind of fell over, but that's the point, right? That's what we wanted. We didn't want to get stuck on a boss for an hour because tuning was off or because a mechanic was scaling funny with a big group or whatever. So it got to be 9 o'clock at that last half hour, and we had just downed boss number 7, the fire Hydra thing. And I was like, let's just back out and do heroic. So we went and did first boss heroic, and that was fine. I think we one-shot that, and it felt really nice. Started getting some of the upgraded crest fragments and stuff. And, we got a couple looks at second boss, a little trickier because it layers on some different mechanics from normal, and we didn't have much time. But so, I mean, like, we'll see what happens tonight. I want to clear out normal if we can. And maybe if Sarkareth seems like a mess, maybe we'll just look at heroic for the rest of the week. But I mean, it feels great. It looks great. I'm thrilled. I really had no expectations coming into this. I mean, I haven't really been stoked on WoW for a couple months, but I had a great time in there last night. And, I also grabbed my 2-piece bonus already. Thank you to my rogue buddy Daz hooked me up. He won a roll on a set item. I already won one set item, and I was like, "Hey Daz, that's a 2-piece for me, buddy. If you don't want to use it," and he hooked me up. So that's nice. I mean, the new Prot Warrior bonus is pretty cool, and stacking two sets is pretty nice right now. So. It was awesome. Just like I can't say enough about how much fun we had in there last night. I think that's really the big thing. It wasn't like, I'm not trying to run down some academic list of like reasons why this is good and that anybody should like it. We just had a great time. Everybody was having fun, and that's the whole point of playing this game, right? So that was cool. And we got into some keys afterwards, like low teens. I think the highest I did was like a 14. We're doing like 12s, stuff like that. Right. Really felt pretty good. The lack of a seasonal affix felt amazing. Just like so many fewer layers of frustration around what we're doing. We're trying to learn dungeons and stuff. I was doing like Halls of Infusion. I haven't done Halls of Infusion since December. I don't remember how the place is laid out or anything. So having, fewer layers on top, I think was really nice. One thing that was weird though, we did Underrot, and I mean, how much did we do Underrot as a keystone in BFA? And I know it was, whatever, 3 years ago now. It doesn't feel like that long ago.
Yeah.
Like I remember Underrot distinctly. We had
I do too. Yep.
We had some issues with boss mechanics and stuff, trying to get back into the groove, and like we definitely have a lot to learn. Like there's a lot of stuff packed into this season to start, learning and mastering. But there was something a little uncanny, a little trippy about going into Underrot and doing that as a Dragonflight key that. I didn't dislike it, I guess, but it just felt weird. It's like it's too early for this. Like maybe it's because I think BFA, like Mythic Plus, started to really come into its own in that expansion. It came in Legion, but it was an awesome feature in Legion, but like it was a headline feature in BFA. Yeah. It was a very big part of what we did, and those dungeons were the keystone dungeons for 2 entire years. Yeah. So that might have something to do with it. Like Underrot was just in the rotation from 2018 to 2020. And, that might be why it's been like a 3-year gap, give or take, not quite. And so,
So this is a really cool topic for me because I'm with you on BFA dungeons. For some reason, Legion dungeons, I remember bits and pieces. I'm not like, there's certainly chunks of them that I remember how to do properly. But I think when Legion and Mythic Plus was first starting out that way, it wasn't taken as seriously in the sense of it wasn't taken as you need to memorize routes and min-max this and be as, but by the time we hit BFA, it was known that that's what you had to do. The tools were in place and the skill set was there for players who wanted to push really high keys to run these dungeons over and over and over again in a way that, really burned in how the affixes were going to work, how the different routes would work. Like it felt like you said, like Mythic Plus had really come into its own. So and they never left the rotation for those 2 years. So like I remember BFA dungeons. Like I remember full routes through them, what different mobs do, how to react to certain mobs, where you should be standing for certain fights. Like I remember all of that for BFA. And I don't for Shadowlands. There's bits and pieces for Shadowlands. Again, it's Shadowlands 2 was like Legion, where I think Mythic Plus fell off for me. I got so burnt out during Shadowlands on the content that they were putting out and the difficulty they were putting it out at that like I feel like my brain was just like as a trauma response going, I just don't even retain this. It's fine. Just get rid of all this information. Which is weird, right? Like I talk about how I really enjoyed the BFA expansion, despite the fact that by popularity it wasn't, the greatest expansion for everyone. Just because of the grind that was there. But I really enjoyed the grind that was there, and I really enjoyed the time that I spent in it. And I think I retained more of that just because of that. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what we feel like in a year or 2 years from now about Dragonflight. Obviously moving into the next expansion and feeling like it's a place where these dungeons aren't just all convoluted in our heads. If we can even identify which dungeons were clearly a Dragonflight dungeon because they've mixed up the pool so much with so many other dungeons throughout the different seasons, whether or not there's going to be ones where like, oh yeah, I can't remember if that one was that wasn't a Pandaria dungeon. That was definitely a Dragonflight one, right? And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, they're sort of similar, but at the same time, aesthetically, they were actually different for the different expansions. So yeah, I love that this is a topic you touched on because it really hit me when you're like, yeah, I really remember Underrot. And I was like, I remember everything about Underrot. I remember right. The initial polls that were nightmare polls to try and do, and the guys with nets who net people, and then you're moving down to the first boss, and they split into different, 3 different images of themselves, and you have to kill the different images, and they all cast the same abilities, and they all hit just as hard, and you got to go through the stupid bug tunnel to the big grub guy that you fight, and he charges, and you have to stand him next to the skeleton on the left side of the room. So
the skeleton.
I remember all of it, right? Like, I remember all, like, it's the whole thing. It's just really funny to hit that note. And I think in that way, it's actually a great option to cycle the dungeons like this because you're going to have players who are around for that time who now only have to learn 5 dungeons or 4 dungeons because they know the other ones because they're all older ones they've already experienced at some point or another. And you have the newer players who never got to see those dungeons and experience them who now get to for the first time, right? I would love to hear from someone who's new to Dragonflight, who's experiencing, or was new in Shadowlands, who's experiencing Freehold on Mythic Plus for the first time and what their experience is like. Because it's a great dungeon.
Right. Yeah. And the thing about Underrot is like, it's almost unchanged. Like I think they moved a couple trash mobs around, but I also did a Vortex Pinnacle last night, and that's a completely different dungeon.
Oh yeah.
Like it has the same physical space. It has some of the same concepts. The bosses have new abilities. The trash layout is different. It's much more like Temple of Jade Serpent, for example, which like is recognizable, but not like if you did Time Walking Temple of Jade Serpent and then Season 1 Dragonflight Keystone, not the same thing. And Vortex Pinnacle got a similar rework, whereas Underrot it's much closer to its BFA incarnation. So, I mean, I think that the rotating dungeon pool is a huge win for the game, and I think it will probably prevent those problems like you sort of alluded to. Like, I think 3 years from now, I won't be like, oh, man, I feel like I was doing Ruby Life Pools every week just yesterday, although Ruby Life Pools was kind of emotional. So maybe, I don't know. We'll see how I do feel about that in 3 years, but
yeah,
I think the rotation with that helps a lot, just not having the stuff be on players' plate so consistently for so long.
Yeah, I'm glad that they're mixing that up. Okay, well, Jason, if you've recapped what you want to recap so far from your past week, I'm going to hop into what's going on this week in World of Warcraft.
That was pretty much everything I got into. Yeah. So if you haven't so far, I highly encourage you to play some Season 2 stuff because it's super fun so far.
Definitely. All right, here we go. All right, this week in World of Warcraft is the Arena Skirmish bonus event, and sadly, there's not a time walking thing attached this week. It's gone. They've finished the time walking spree. But if you're somebody who likes Arena Skirmishes, get in there. You get the Sign of the Skirmisher buff. Your honor gains are increased by 50%, and there's a quest to win 10 of them, which gives you some conquest and honor. So if you're looking for some conquest and honor, it's a good way to get that. Okay, your checklist for the week, right? I'm gonna bypass the aiding the Accord because there's a larger conversation that needs to happen here that I think is important. And we're gonna go right into dungeon quests. The dungeon quest this week is fighting is its own reward. That's complete 5 heroic dungeons to receive a 415 eye level trophy chest or 15 Drake's Flame crest fragments, as well as 250 reputation with all 5 major factions. I love that they're changing this up, man. I really do. That's not just specific dungeons. I'm down for this. Good job. Pleased with the quest.
Yeah, I actually did this last week because I wanted to get that item to maybe, have an option to upgrade. It's not like an amazing reward for people whose target is like heroic and above rating, but it's like a normal equivalent item that you can then upgrade. I would probably recommend not taking the Drake's Shadow Flame crest fragments from this for the time being until you have some 415 or higher items to actually upgrade.
Yeah.
It was weird doing heroic dungeons because I haven't done them since like the first week of the expansion. And again, I was stepping in spaces I haven't done in a long, like Neltharis. I haven't done that on Keystone yet either, but I hadn't done Neltharis in 5 months, but I think this is better than having specific dungeons. And cause like sometimes it would be Keystone dungeons and sometimes it would be dungeons that weren't in the Keystone pool. So like you had, this makes you do heroic dungeons, but it also fills out the heroic dungeon queue, but it gives you kind of a nice reward for doing it, like something that could be relevant. If you're trying to do normal raid or push in a heroic raid, you can take this item and upgrade it. The only problem is it's like totally random. So for my trouble, I got some bracers, which is not an amazing option, but it's something. And I assume that the stuff from this would be catalyzable, but I don't know for sure. We don't have the catalyst until June 13th.
Yeah.
But like if this lets you put stuff in the catalyst, then that gives you options for transmog and for set bonuses and stuff. So, it's a fair bit of rep too. So I think it's a good revamp, even though, do I really want to spend this much time in heroic dungeons? Not really, but I'm a tank, so that helps me get quick queues. But how long does a heroic dungeon take to run? 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
Right.
I think it's a win, even though maybe I don't end up doing it that consistently. But if you need it, it's there.
Yeah, exactly. All right, PvP quests, we got Epic PGs and Solo Shuffle. So those are both increased rewards this week if you pick up those quests ahead of time and then you get in there and run them. PvP Brawl for the week is classic Ashran, where basically you're heading into the original feeling of what Ashran was. So buckle up for a couple hours of excitement at least as you're heading into Ashran. Of course, there's a quest for something different where you get some Marks of Honor, Conquest, and Honor. But aiding the Accord, circling back. Okay, so this is a really interesting thing. So Jason and I got together before the show today and basically said, hey, just chat about a couple of things in the game. And I was like, dude, that Suffusion Camp aiding the Accord, that's really, like, I was looking up what that actually is, and it's quite the grind to do. And I guess, it is a weekly, so it'll take the week to do. And he goes, what are you talking about? I had Sniff and Seeking. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, when I picked up my aiding the Accord this week, I got Sniff and Seeking. I was like, oh man, Sniff and Seeking is a lot easier. That's you just get in there and do the one little sniff and seek, and then you're done. He's like, yeah. And he goes, what do you mean you got Suffusion Camp? I was like, yeah, I got Suffusion Camp. He goes, well, let me try an alt. So he logs in on his alt, and he got Researchers Under Fire. And I was like, well, so you just get different aiding the Accords? Like, there just are. It's not a consistent thing. Apparently, Jason on two of his alts, got Researchers Under Fire. On his main, got Sniff and Seeking, and I got Suffusion Camp. So we don't know what's going on with aiding the Accord at the moment, but sometimes you get lucky and get the really easy ones, and sometimes you don't.
Sniff and Seeking is the good one, in case you were curious. That's the one you want. We don't have enough information or a pattern here to figure out what is happening with this. So we'll have to keep an eye on it for now and compare notes and see what happens next reset. I don't know if something just weird happened or if what it offers you rotates on some kind of basis or something now. I
don't know.
Very, very confusing revelation that we have run into today. But I guess just double check when you go to the NPC, like pick up the quest and then like read what it says, because we can't tell you for sure what it's going to be.
Yeah, and just so you're aware, Sniff and Seeking, obviously, we covered last week as one of the things you can do, which is completing a dig with Merit. The Researchers Under Fire is the big event that takes place down inside of Zaralek Cavern. So obviously there's a timer on the map. You have to wait for the event to be up. Timing wise, you go in, you defend the Researchers, you get that accomplished. Suffusion Camp is with the Farak Assaults. So you go up to the Farak Assaults, you have to kill a ton of mobs until you actually get enough key fragments, or enough keys to open up chests, which get you key fragments. And once you get enough key fragments, you then open up the big chest, which then completes the quest, which is why it's a weird grind, because it's just entirely RNG based of trying to get these fragments and then trying to get enough of the chests open to be able to get the key to be able to open the big chests so that you actually finish the quest. So it's kind of the lemon of the group, if you will, the sour one of the group, if you have to get one that you're going to be picking. So but let us know what you're getting. Maybe you're getting something that's not even one of these three, like something we haven't seen. So I'll be curious to see what they do as far as resolving that goes, or if they even know it's happening yet. But we figured it out pretty quickly this morning when I came in to gripe about Suffusion Camp. All right, world boss this week is the Zakali Elders. This is the Desjardins duo inside the Zaralek Cavern. Pay attention to which one you're attacking is the tip I'd give, because when you're attacking one, the other one then takes reduced damage. So it's kind of important. Basically, the Gola and Vulcan's rivalry is so potent that they gain strength while within 7 yards of each other, reducing their damage received by 90%. So you have to spread them out, which we did. But then you also had this just weird effect of, while they were spread out, because your DPS is so split with your group, that it just seemed like one of them just wasn't taking damage at all compared to the other. So focus on whatever one's dying faster is what I would do. Have your tanks pull, have different tanks pull them apart, and then just focus on whatever one's dying faster. Get yourself some 415 loot. You got plate, shoulders, and waist, mail, feet, and head, leather, chest, and wrist, and cloth, feet, and legs. I didn't get any loot. I haven't gotten loot off of World Boss actually in weeks and weeks and weeks. It's been really weird. I kind of wish there was bad luck protection on it, but there isn't. So it is what it is.
I got shoulders because I'm spoiled. I'm a spoiled brat, and I got my 2-piece day one, and I got 415 upgradable shoulders for the catalyst if I still need them by June 13th, which hopefully I won't. But there was some debate going on in chat about what was happening with these bosses as the tanks kept frantically trying to split them apart, and then other tanks would put them back together. They don't really have to be that far apart, but it might just be safer to have them farther apart so people don't do anything you don't want them to do. But there is like a little bit of synergy here where if you have the debuff from the one boss and you ride over to the other side, you like dispel the crap that boss leaves on the ground, and you get a little haste buff.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. I feel like a ranged DPS, I could probably see this. If your tanks are really good about keeping them exactly 7 yards apart, then you can just kind of float between them. But that's a level of coordination I wouldn't expect for most world boss
bosses,
groups. But yeah, like the damage shield is just absurd. So as long as they're taking damage, you're good. There's not much else to really say about it. Don't stand in bad and keep them, a little bit apart, and hopefully get some loot. One thing that's nice is every single armor class has one piece they can catalyze and one other piece that they can collect. So that's cool. That'll come in handy, especially for alts and stuff. There aren't any like jewelry items or anything unique, like any trinkets or anything, which a lot of times, they will put stuff like that on world bosses, but nothing this round. It's all armor from these bosses, I believe.
Yeah, it's all armor pieces. 395 loot still comes off of Strunran, so if you actually want to go out and kill Strunran, Skies Misery, and Unarmed Plains, the other world boss that's up, you can get yourself some 395 loots as well. The Mythic Plus affixes for the week with the new changes to the affixes. No seasonal, remember that. There's no seasonal affix anymore. So we have Tyrannical, Storming, and Raging, meaning boss enemies have more health and them and their minions inflict increased damage. Storming, while in combat, enemies periodically some damaging winds. And Raging, as in the new Raging, where when non-boss enemies reach 30% health, they enrage, and it grants them a temporary immunity to crowd control effects. So, and this is still dispellable. It's still an enrage effect. You can still get rid of it. But they're immune to crowd control effects, which means you can't interrupt them, you can't stun them, you can't root them, you can't slow them. They're going to be just running around immune to stuff. So, this is dangerous for some trash, but it's not, in my opinion, as dangerous as getting massively increased damage at that range. I think this is great. I think this is a fun week for Tyrannical for sure. Actually, probably one of the best weeks for Tyrannical you're going to run into, to be honest. Because Raging doesn't affect Tyrannical bosses at all. Storming is on Tyrannical bosses, but it's an affix that you can actually handle well. Often you can choose to soak Stormings if you're worried about them affecting an ability that you need to dodge or a space that you're in. Tanks often just soak them because they tend to come off the boss pretty often, so you can just soak them as a tank and deal with it, which isn't so bad. You are going to have Tyrannical bosses, and yes, Tyrannical Underwrought can be super ultra nasty. If you remember what that used to be like back in the BFA days, where some of these bosses had abilities that already, in BFA was super spiky, but you'd have abilities that would just hit you for 70% of your hit points, which with Tyrannical was like 90% of your hit points as a tank. And you needed people to spike heal you back up afterwards, or the next normal melee would kill you. So, you got to be paying attention to that. And the pool for this is Brackenhide Hollow, Halls of Infusion, Uldaman, Naltharius, Freehold, Naltharius, Freehold, Underwrought, Naltharian's Lair, and Vortex Pinnacle. So we do have, 2 BFA dungeons, a Legion dungeon, and a Cataclysm dungeon in the rotation right now. So we do only have 4 of those Dragonflight dungeons in there. But Jason, what are you thinking about this week for, all the Mythic Plus stuff?
I would say that I don't love it when the first week of a new season with a new rotation is Tyrannical.
Sure, I get that.
They can make the affixes be whatever they want. And I think they should always start with a fort week. Just to get people in there and kind of feel it out. A big part of the learning curve is going to be the bosses. And there was stuff that I saw in Halls of Infusion last night that I never saw in Mythic Zero because the bosses never lived anywhere near that long. I have no firsthand experience with what would happen when the bosses were alive long enough to actually do all their stuff. So I feel like putting the damage modifier and all that extra health on that first week of people really just checking it out it wouldn't be my preference. I wish it was the other way around, but overall this week isn't really too bad. I felt like trash was just exploding. I was doing low keys, but the tuning felt okay in that range. I think a lot of players are going to be stepping into like plus 6, 7, 8 up through 10, 12, 13, 14 this week. I don't think I'm alone in doing keys in that kind of lower range where you only have one affix now, right? For a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, it felt okay. One thing I noticed, and this might have been a weird coincidence with timing or something, but last boss and Underrot, when you have that cleansing light thing that goes out on a player and the group stacks in the cleansing light and it clears the poop off the floor.
Yes.
I noticed that it seemed as though when a storming tornado would rotate into there, that the cleansing light would just eat it and it would go away. Kind of like how quaking would work on Worm Boss in Shadow Moon Burial Grounds.
Yeah.
It could just be a quirk of timing and that it was expiring anyway, and I just happened to notice it a couple times, like while we were doing that mechanic. But it seemed like they did a pass really late in the process to kind of clean some stuff up in these keystones. Which, if you remember at the outset of season 1, as is kind of understandable with that much new content launching, there was some stuff where it was like affixes aren't really dovetailing with these fight mechanics, and stuff was getting fixed on the fly. So I don't know. Maybe, that's just an anecdote, and I have no idea. Maybe it wasn't actually eating the storming, and it was just expiring naturally. But it seemed like it was eating it. Yeah. But like if that's the kind of stuff that they're putting onto the first week, then it's awesome, because you need to be stacked pretty tight for that mechanic to function. And if a tornado is knocking you out of the stack, like, that's not good. So, I mean, overall, this is going to be a week of learning a lot and starting low and trying to push keys up, right? So I think for most players, like, are there people out there doing plus 20s right now? Yeah, yes. But is that me, and is that you, listener? Probably not, and so it's exciting to me, though. I want to check all this stuff out. I want to start solving all these puzzles and seeing how all this stuff comes together, and finding the stuff that's smooth and easy and nice, and also finding the friction and finding the stuff that I know we have to look out for, or that, like, we maybe need to, make some noise about getting changed or something like that. That's all part of the process for me, and I enjoy it. I think that learning curve is a really fun part of the system. So
yeah,
I did like 3 dungeons last night after raid. I was playing pretty late, so I'm looking forward to jumping into a lot more this week.
I guess one thing you can guarantee is Tyrannical will make sure that you learn all the new boss mechanics, because you're going to see all of them. And Raging will make sure that you learn which mobs are dangerous, because you're going to find out. So
yeah, that's true.
That's it is a learning week, so you are going to pick up on those things. And for a Tyrannical week, and I agree that I wish that the first week of a season wasn't Tyrannical, but for a Tyrannical week, I think these are actually pretty decent affixes. So we'll see where it goes from there. All right, Darkmoon Faire is currently live. You get rep, you get skill for your professions, you get knowledge for your professions. Be sure that you are taking advantage of all of that, as well as all the other perks for increasing your experience and rep gain. And there was the toy that you could get from Twitch Prime, right? The consortium sort of portal or arch, right? Someone had put out a tweet that showed they used that on the carousel in Darkmoon Faire, and if you use it when you're on the carousel in Darkmoon Faire, the consortium thing actually will pivot while the thing pivots around you. So you're not only spinning in a circle, the consortium thing is spinning at a different pace around your character while you're on it, which is really weird.
So if you want to make yourself seasick while you play WoW,
if you want a trippy experience, use the consortium thing while on the wheel. There is the Blazing Hippogriff up, since I'm talking about drops right now. Right now, for those of you with Twitch Prime or Amazon Prime, and you're on Twitch, and you have your accounts linked.
It's a Twitch drop. You should come watch twitch.tv/Shieldwall tonight at 7:30 Eastern and earn progress towards your Blazing Hippogriff, Twitch drop. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Micro Holiday. Microsoft was on my mind, apparently. I had Word open earlier.
Next month, when the deal unexpectedly closes with the FTC, then
I'm waiting for that. That's going to happen.
They will change the name of Micro Holidays to Microsoft Holidays.
Yes,
and
exactly.
you only have access to them if you subscribe to Game Pass.
Oh my God. No, that's not a thing. That's not going to happen. It's not happening, guys.
None of what I just said is going to happen at all.
The Spring Balloon Festival is on and going. I didn't see anything inside of the Traveler's Log for Balloon Festival. I looked, but
I think there is something, but I think it's just like taking a balloon ride, and I think that will give you some Traveler's Log progress for the month. But cool. I think it's literally just that. So
they should make it 200 Traveler's Log progress, so that people actually go and do the balloon rides. So people who want to do balloon rides can actually do them.
Please just do this, everyone, and then you'll be done with your Traveler's Log.
Well, and then everyone can actually experience it for once, and it fills out all the queues.
Not standing there for 8 times as long as the balloon ride takes just to start.
Yeah. And that runs the 10th through the 12th, so that's coming up well, it starts today, I guess, and runs till Friday. So be sure you're taking advantage where you can. You can go to High Mountain, Suramar, Uldum, Valley of the Four Winds, Crystal Song Forest, and Nagrand. I really wish they'd added one to Dragonflight, because a lot of these zones would be really cool to do a hot air balloon ride over, especially if you could have currents of the wind sort of blowing the balloons around, and you'd have people dragon riding and flying around you. It'd be pretty cool to see. So, yeah.
Yeah, and there's so many really interesting new NPCs that they've introduced into the story in Dragonflight, but we haven't seen that big holiday revamp yet for this cycle. So there's hope. I mean, I think Dragon Isles would be a great candidate to have a new balloon festival ride and some new and some different, maybe like existing NPC that we know telling you a story.
I'd love it.
Who's the dragon with the dwarf form?
Viridis, I know who you mean. Yes,
let's go on a balloon ride with him. It's all right there.
He can sit on the edge of the balloon. What are they called?
The basket.
The basket. Sit on the edge of the basket and sort of had his head slumped down and tell you a story about what's below him the whole time.
If he falls, he could just turn into dragon form and fly
he's
away.
Fine. He's totally safe. But yeah, I think that'd be hilarious. And I hope Blizzard just heard our idea and is like, yes, we'll do that. Okay, hot fixes. Obviously, first week of new season, you're going to get a whole schmack of them. But the ones that we want to cover, I mean, obviously, so the usual caveat, if you play World of Warcraft on any character or class, you might want to check your class changes. There's going to be class changes to your class, so you're going to want to check them out. Some classes did receive considerable buffs. Some of them got some nerfs. Some of them just got tuning. Some of them got fixes. There was a lot of balancing that happened. So just have a look, see what happened with your class, decide from there. I'll also add the same caveat to dungeons that Jason just mentioned earlier. There's a whole bunch of tuning passes that happened to the Mythic Plus dungeons for this season. So they're still getting stuff tuned in and changed out. And, it's great to see them making the changes they are. So the changes we're going to cover, though, Drakthir wearing the Scarlet Crusade tabard can now actually speak to the Scarlet Crusade Quartermaster in the Darkmoon Faire. That makes sense. But if you were someone who tried to do that and were like, dude, this is broken, why don't it work? It's fixed now, so you're good on that. They fixed an issue where some characters were not able to dragon ride after 10.1. I think this is probably the worst possible bug that could happen in this expansion. Is just removing that form of movement that is so crucial and critical and enjoyable. So
how do you even really get around in the zones if you can't do that? Luckily they fixed that.
Yes,
that's bad.
That was a very bad one to run into. As far as items and rewards go, the toy earpieces of Tranquil Focus now cost 1 copper as opposed to 50 gold. And Jason, why did they change this?
Well, I don't know why it came in so hot. It was very expensive. It's a very expensive toy, but the earpieces of Tranquil Focus, it eliminates many musical and vocal projections of characters around the player. So, in other words, like sniffing, for example. There are the Niffin. They enjoy sniffing, and some players don't want to hear that in their ear, in their game sound. So you can do that. You can actually buy it in Stormwind, in Orgrimmar, in Dalaran, or in Talador. So have at it. I'm pretty sure it's also on a vendor in Loam. I bought this or something very much like this in Loam. So there you go. And you know what? Even if you like the sniffing noises, that stuff really has never bothered me. So I don't use this, but it goes in your toy box. It counts as a toy in your collection, and it's 1 copper from a vendor, and you can just have it. So even if you're never going to use it, you might as well buy it and add it to your collection. But it's a nice quality of life feature. If those sounds really bother you and like make the game worse for you, then just shut them off. Then you can do it with this item that is essentially free, right? Like they literally can't make it cost any less for it to be on a vendor. So don't just be advised that it's out there if that feature is something that you want to enable.
It's funny to me because it's a technical issue that could have been solved by going, okay, you go into your sound options, and under sound options there's this toggle box, and the toggle box is for turning on and off these particular sounds, right? And they went, you know what? No, this is an RPG. It's a role-playing game. So let's, put something into the game that your character does to eliminate the amount that you hate this sound. So here's these earpieces that you can put on that will filter out these particular sounds that you don't like. So it was a creative solution, I thought, as opposed to just putting in a game setting, which is what they could have done. So I think that's neat. All right, Algothar's Puzzle Box now shares a cooldown. The shared cooldown is now increased to 30 seconds, and its effect is decreased by 30% specifically for Unholy DKs. I thought that was wow.
Sorry, Unholy DKs.
Yes. It generated a lot of memes on the internet, which is why I wanted to mention it, because I thought it was quite funny to wake up to a lot of very different, varied memes of Unholy DKs reacting to being specifically targeted by the Algothar's Puzzle Box nerf. Yeah, I mean, in general, just so your heads up, if you were someone who was wondering why all of that stuff took place, or people are all complaining about Algothar's Puzzle Box now, that's why they nerfed it. And it's not as good as it used to be, and it's really not as good as it used to be for Unholy DKs. So,
but it shouldn't be good because it's season 2.
It shouldn't be. Right.
The Algothar Puzzle Box comes from Algothar Academy, yes? I believe so.
Yes.
You cannot get a season 2 version of this item. Therefore, there is no reason, like, it needs to be nerfed into irrelevance, and I'm sorry if that messes up your itemization right now, but it just sets a bad precedent. Because if this trinket remains relevant in a space where players now cannot obtain it, that makes everybody feel bad. Even people benefiting from it ultimately will feel bad about it because they can't get a higher item level one. They have this relic from last season, and it creates this cascade of problems. Like, it's cool to have powerful items, but when new stuff comes out, like, the new stuff needs to be the focal point for tuning and design, and the stuff that has been deprecated needs to be nerfed if it's not obtainable anymore.
Yeah, no. There are also some fixes that came in. They fixed an issue where players weren't unable to access the support site from the in-game menu. I feel like support probably didn't mind that at first. Were just substantially less tickets being submitted. But
that was a good day on the support test.
Yeah.
Although what happened the next day wasn't good.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone who had to work Tuesday of that week was really unhappy. They fixed an issue where player nameplates were not displaying correctly. And they fixed an issue that resulted in crashes for Mac users under certain circumstances. Whenever I see Blizzard do this, I'm always reminded that they are one of the very few companies out there that actually look at Apple products and Macs and go, yes, we'd like our games to be playable on those systems. There's a lot of games out there that are not optimized for Mac and can't be played on Mac. So, I guess props to them for continuing to look at it, even though I know Mac users think it's still totally not optimized at all for them. It is substantially more than most games.
Yeah, a lot of that is just like the Mac platform has not, they have issued like traditional, computer gaming, I feel like, in a lot of ways. They made it hard for the industry to, support their platform. And yeah, a lot of publishers don't even bother, it seems like, it these days. Yeah. So at least Blizzard still supports it to some degree for WoW, but it's a rough situation all around, but at least it's crashing less.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
They also fixed an issue where Pandaren did not have the race change option. Yeah, if you were Pandaren, you're Pandaren for life. There's no changing. So, yeah, they fixed that one. I think that's another one of those funny ones. But
it's weird that it would you got to wonder about how this stuff gets put together.
Yeah.
Like, it would sort of make sense that, like, okay, race change options are just bugged right now, so nobody can do it. But, like, oh no, it's only
Pandarans. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so
and Pandaren aren't even now. They're no longer the only crossed faction race, right? Because you have Dractyr Evokers.
Yep.
What a weird combination of circumstances.
Mm-hmm. You may have thought that was the meat of the episode, but we're actually just moving into the meat of the episode because it is Aberrus Wing 1, the discarded works, that we get to talk about next. And so this is Khazra, the Hellforged. It's going to be the first boss we talk about, where although Neltharion would not use them himself until much later, he experimented with Elementium plating in the early days of Aberrus. The end result of the Elementium and Shadow Flame was Khazra, who was deemed far too unstable for release. Driven mad by the excruciating pain of her Elementium plates, she now serves as the guardian of the Shadowed Crucible. I'd just like to point out that we actually help this creature throughout this battle by removing the plates from them, so they're not in so much pain. This is,
That's one way to think about it, yeah. We're certainly ending its pain.
Yeah. Oh, God. Okay.
That's... That's about the best way I could describe this fight.
It's true. Jason, do you want to hop into what this room looks like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the room is it's like round, maybe a bit oblong, something like that. But positioning is very important on this boss because of two particular mechanics. So I would recommend that you probably designate a spot where you want to park the boss, and then direct traffic around where players are supposed to move with those mechanics. You probably there's not a lot of things that require you to move far apart necessarily or for long periods of time. So try not to park yourself 40 yards away from the rest of the group. And there is a relatively minor knockback, and there are edges of the room where you can fall into lava. So keep that in mind. Watch your back. It is kind of a baby knockback, but if you're in a bad position, a baby knockback is enough to ruin your day. So just some things to think about as you're getting the group set up to walk in here and set the boss up.
Yeah. All right, tank stuff. What do we got tank-wise for this?
So not anything really too interesting here, but it's called Terror Claws. It's a physical and Shadow Flame hit, and it also leaves a Shadow Flame dot and a physical damage vulnerability, a hefty one. It's 200% extra physical damage for 20 seconds. So you got to switch every single one of these. It doesn't get cast a whole lot, obviously, because it's last 20 seconds. So you can't have the stacking up on her target, but you need to switch this off because, you don't want to be actively tanking the boss with 200% physical damage taken, for one thing, and you don't want to eat multiple Terror Claws. So there's no positioning requirements or anything with it. Tanks can stand on top of each other, but just switch off Terror Claws.
Yeah. All right, so ability-wise, we'll start off with Hellsteel Carnage, which is at 80, 60, and 40% health. Kazra's armor shatters, dealing big burst damage to all players, and pieces of her armor also drop to the ground, dealing damage to any player's hit. So basically, hey, you're breaking these plates off of her, and they're shattering and scattering around the room, and there's big orange swirlies that you want to dodge and not stand in, because not only are you taking pulsing damage because of the pain that she's experiencing, that she's given off these pulsing waves of damage, you're also, if you get hit by these, taking additional increased big burst damage by being hit by any of them. So just dodge, and you want to be healing through this. This is a good time for personal usages like your bark skins and whatnot. Jason,
it gets the ramp here is pretty significant. I mean, this is an easy fight. Let me preface anything else we say about this with this boss is easier than first boss in Vault of the Incarnates, all things considered. It's obviously scaled up a tier of health and damage and everything, but mechanically, I think it's even simpler, and it dies, I think, easier. But it does have this ramp. Every 20% of its health you knock off, it's going to do more of its mechanics, and the stuff that it's doing is going to hurt worse. So keep that in mind. I still feel like it's better to hero Time Warp Lust, whatever the Evoker one is called, at the top of the fight when everyone is alive and in position and has all their cooldowns up, and just blast as much health off of the boss as you can, as fast as you can, to keep the fight as short as possible. Sometimes with ramping fights, you might need to save it for that 20% burn phase or what have you, but not with the boss is not complicated or difficult enough to warrant that. I think you're going to get more benefit from using it early, but just be aware, when you hit those thresholds at the 20% health kind of checkpoints, the room's going to explode with stuff that everybody's going to have to keep an eye on. And the fight does get harder at each of those thresholds, even though the bar is low and it doesn't get raised that much, it does get harder the longer that you fight it.
Yeah, so the next ability we'll chat about is Dread Rifts, where Kazara marks multiple players with circles, and after 5 seconds, they drop a rift. You don't want to stand in the rift. It's a bad rift, and you don't want to soak the rift with your buddy. It's also a bad thing, so don't do that. The rifts are going to disappear when a beam actually touches them, but as you sort of go on and you're shattering this armor, more and more people are going to get targeted by these rifts. You're going to have more and more people who have to run out of the group, drop these circles at the edge of the room, and there also just happens to always be a knockback right after you drop these. So as you drop them, you want to sidestep so you don't get knocked backwards into it. Or if you're dropping it, you want to keep running away if there isn't someone dropping one behind you. So you then get knocked back farther away from it as opposed to being knocked back into the Dread Rift. It's really tempting to drop it and run forward. If you drop it and run forward, you're going to get knocked back into it again and take more damage. So just be sure you're dropping these at the edge of the room and you're not running back into them again.
Yeah, these actually, I mean, you get a lot more of this stuff. I think it starts off with like 3 targets basically, and then I think it adds 1 every single time.
Yeah, probably
so it ends
scales
up being,
with people, yeah.
It ends up being like 6 people or whatever. So, yeah, this is why, you know, positioning is really important on this fight. It's this interaction between the Dread Rifts and the Rays of Anguish, and like parking the Dread Rifts in a spot where people are going to know where to expect them, right? Like that's, I think, like, again, simple fight. This is not really taxing, but having a plan is important. And you say, okay, your Dread Rifts, they go here, they go on this side, they go at near these markers, you know, and then hopefully everybody knows to drop them there, and then everyone else knows to expect them to be there.
Right. Yeah, so Rays of Anguish is the other ability you mentioned there, and I also mentioned a little bit because rifts disappear when a beam touches them. And the beam they mean is Rays of Anguish. So several players are targeted by a beam, which follows them and leaves behind a trail of fire. It's actually kind of the weirdest looking fire. It's like almost like a pink lava that sits on the ground.
But it's like Shadow Flame.
It's supposed to be Shadow Flame. It's supposed to be,
It's like a Shadow Flame laser that's like burning up the ground or something.
Yes,
so,
true.
Yeah.
And you basically, you take this beam that's chasing you, and you run it so that it's going to pass through a rift. And when it hits the rift, it will take away the rift, and the beam will also go away. Now, the beams will go away on their own. So if you end up in a situation where you have beams and you don't have rifts, I don't know how you managed to get there, but if that happens, you can just, you know, drag the beam around the room until the beam actually goes away. But just keep in mind that you are leaving a trail of, you know, poop on the ground that is going to create limiting space for everybody unless they're going to pass through it and take damage. So just, you know, as Jason said, it's good to have an idea of an organized placement for where these rifts are going to go, and then obviously where you're going to take the beam, so that side of the room is the messy side of the room, if you will. And you are going to get more beams targeting people as the fight goes on. Same thing as Dread Rifts, so every time you hit that 80, 60, 40% health, you'll get more and more people receiving beams, more and more people receiving rifts, and you sort of just have to deal with it as you go.
Yeah, it's it can be kind of fraught when, especially as the fight progresses, when a bunch of Rays of Anguish go out, because again, it might go out on like 6 people or something. So, you know, that's why it's important to have the plan of like, where are these people going? They need to know like where the Dread Rifts are going to be. You can also, you know, if you keep the group a bit tight, you can make this a lot easier on yourself because there's this rhythm to the fight, right? Like the Dread Rifts go out. We didn't get quite that far yet, but there's like a knockback. The knockback comes in, and then after the knockback is usually when the Rays of Anguish go out. So if people like use the knockback to position themselves like near the Dread Rifts, and then, you know, hang out either behind or near the Dread Rifts as the Rays of Anguish are going out, they beeline to you, hit the rift, and then you move on with the rest of the poll. One thing to point out for heroic players too is the Rays of Anguish only go away if they hit a Dread Rift. They will time out on LFR and normal, but if you're doing heroic and above, then you have to do the Dread Rift Rays of Anguish interaction, or else you're going to be getting chased the whole time. So,
unless you're a hunter, that's a problem.
Yeah, right. Like it's obnoxious. You don't want to deal with that. Yeah. So like, again, this is simple. Like this is first boss material, but this is the challenge that the boss presents to you. The fight kind of hinges around you doing this dance of Rays of Anguish into Dread Rifts well. And if you do it well enough, then you're probably going to win.
Yeah. Okay, so the next thing that you're going to be dealing with is, if you haven't had enough swirlies yet, there's more swirlies that happen throughout the fight. Revenant's Blood, after Kazara drops below 80% health, so after the first time you've shattered armor off of her, she'll just start also not just throwing out the armor projectiles that are orange swirlies you have to dodge, but just additional orange swirlies that you have to dodge. And the frequency that you see these orange swirlies also increases as you do more armor shatters. So as the fight goes on, you're just going to have to be forced to move more and more often, because you're going to get more and more swirlies to dodge constantly throughout the entire fight. So it's just, you know, something you got to pay attention to. Okay, Hellbeam is probably the next thing that we should talk about. Basically, at 100 energy, so the boss has an energy bar and builds up energy as the fight goes on, Kazara turns towards a player and breathes a mortal frontal beam. In other words, the dragon breathes fire and it comes out of its face. So when you have Hellbeam happening, don't be in front of the dragon that's breathing fire. It's you gotta dodge it. Basically the raid takes.
All right, hold on. I'm writing this down. Okay, fighting the dragon. Yeah, shadow
face,
flame, breath. Okay, yeah. It comes out of the face. Okay, got
it. Cool, good. All right, yes.
This is dramatic. Like,
yeah.
But you are cycling out of a lot of stuff on the ground, so you have to be careful. Like I believe that she faces a player to do this, and so you kind of want to try to bait it, because you don't want it
going where all your beams are going.
Blasting at somebody who's running away with Rays of Anguish, right? Yeah. I believe you can see the energy ticker on the boss frame, but so you have an idea, even if you don't have timers of like when it's coming in. Just don't be in this. It's just area denial basically. But if you get caught with it, you're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah. And then the last ability, just to go over, since Jason already mentioned Terror Claws for tanks, is Wing Extinction. This is the knockback I talked about earlier, where basically at the moment you drop one of these rifts, you want to move out of the way because you're going to get a Wings of Extinction, which is going to knock you back. Basically, it's a burst of raid damage that knocks back all players probably like 5 yards, I'd say, maybe 10 yards, and applies a 20-second dot to everyone. So it's just more steady damage on everybody. This is one of those great fights as a healer, just be like, I just have to keep, as a druid, hots up on everyone all of the time, constantly, because everyone's just taking damage from something throughout the whole fight. So, and that taking damage just gets more and more intense as the fight goes on. The Wings of Extinction doesn't actually get worse as more and more armor things break. It's not like they're knocking you back farther. Maybe that's a mythic mechanic I haven't looked at yet. It's possible, but that's at least something for you, that knockback doesn't get any worse. It's just something that obviously the dot's going to hit harder on higher difficulties. Yeah,
I was actually surprised at how minor the knockback was, even going like from normal to heroic. I mean, on normal it's a baby knockback. I think it's a little bit more of a knockback on heroic, but I was expecting it to be much more than it actually was. So just be aware. Again, there are like edges of this room that you can be knocked into lava. So just don't do that. And then you'll be happy. Yeah. Really, I mean, that's all there is to this boss. It's a one phaser, right? Like the mechanics ramp up and you get more instances of them, as the fight progresses, but you fight this boss for 40 seconds and you've seen everything that she's going to do, basically.
It just happens more frequently, and that's it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like overall, just that's the biggest thing I would say is just have a plan for positioning and make sure everybody understands like where the mechanics go in the room. And tanks, keep an eye out on like, okay, if everything's filling up with the Shadow Flame crap on the ground because of the lasers, then scoot the boss over a little bit, and give people a little bit more room to stay close, but have room to drop it and get behind it. That's really all there is to it. So overall, I think this is an incredible first boss. I'm so happy with it. It looks cool, super cool looking model.
It does.
It's like it says like the Elementium armor, like Deathwing style kind of, but like the dragon itself is sort of like it's been like consumed by Shadow Flame, sort of like its body like isn't totally there. It's partially like living Shadow Flame, and you can see kind of part of the skeleton, through the Shadow Flame, and awesome looking boss, really cool visual effects. It really sets the tone, I think, to get you into the raid. And overall the fight is simple. It's there for you to knock it over and get some rewards and start making your way through. So
yeah, I loved watching that.
Super cool intro to the raid.
Yeah, I loved watching that big Elementium jaw explode and shatter and get to see more of the dragon's face. I just thought it was a really cool effect to be able to have that happen. So no, and mechanically I agree with you. I think it's a great first boss. It does have mechanics that need to be executed properly. When you talk about heroic and up needing to kite the Shadow Flame into the actual rifts just to make sure the beams actually get taken away. So there is that sort of level of pressure, but on, LFR and normal, that pressure it's an easy way to lessen it by going, you know what, if they happen to mess up and they don't get it to one of these things, no problem. It just fades away on its own. You don't have to worry about it. I think that's great. So yeah, I think it's a killer first boss. I think it'd be good. All right, next boss. The Amalgamation Chamber. The eternal blaze burns with the heat of 1,000 suns, while the essence of shadow blooms with darkness incarnate. So yeah, basically ultimate darkness and really hot, spicy stuff. Although exceptionally powerful on their own, when combined, they surge with unchecked might of Shadow Flame, creating a whirlwind of ultimate destruction. Yeah, so this actually was it was a funny experience for me on LFR because we ran in and pulled this boss, and I thought it was basically trash mobs because it was just two elementals, and I'm just so used to seeing elementals in this elemental model that it wasn't like, oh my goodness, this has to be a boss. So yeah, that was a funny start to it. But Jason, why don't you describe the room for us?
So this room is kind of long and kind of wide, which you're going to need because you are going to want to separate these two bosses. And their mechanics require quite a bit of movement in spurts. Like there's stuff you need to move away with, or move to stack into, or stuff to run away from that does fall off damage or whatever. So you sort of have these like lanes to run down, and you have a space to keep the the bosses split apart. On lower difficulties, the splitting the boss thing doesn't matter. But on heroic and up, they have elemental instability, which increases their damage by 200% while they're within 25 yards of each other, which is kind of far, and that's a lot of extra damage. I would recommend, if you are trying to get into heroic prog and above, even stepping into this on normal, do it the right way, because it'll help you learn how to learn the fight versus going, oh, we'll just brute force it and do it wrong.
I will say on LFR, they split them inside the group that I was in. They did pull them apart to the sides of the room. No.
Nice. I mean, like, yeah, can you kill it faster if you just stack them up and deal with it? Like, yeah, I'm sure you obviously can, but like this is not a long fight to begin with. It's not like you're going to be, I don't know. It's not some kind of marathon experience, right? It's going to die, and you'll learn good habits if progressing farther is your goal. If your target is kind of lower difficulties, and maybe you have a couple all-stars who have just like mega, 2-target cleave or something, and they're going to carry you to glory, then, sure, do what's right for your group. But my advice would be start learning the good habits, like learn to do it the right way if you want to move up to the harder difficulties, because otherwise you are introducing more and more wrinkles to take that step into heroic. And then that makes the learning curve that much harder.
Yeah. And okay, tank wise, what do we got tanks for this?
So,
they're just splitting them apart.
Yeah. Step one, split them apart, and then they have similar abilities, but they're just themed around their element, right? So, Essence of Shadow does Shadow Spike at the tank. It does shadow damage. Eternal Blaze does Flame Slash. It does fire damage. It hurts, but it's actually spell reflectable. And you can mitigate it with stuff that it's raw magic damage. So if you have anything that protects you against magic damage, you can use it. It comes in like decently frequently. I feel like this is probably every 7 seconds or something like that. I wasn't really counting, but it came in quite a bit. The problem with this is not so much that, because you're not going to be tank swapping in general practice, right? Like you can't. You have to move too far. And then you got to reposition everything, and it's a mess. The confounding factor here is that both of these have this like pulsing dot application. Essence of Shadow has Corrupting Shadow, and Eternal Blaze has Blazing Heat. Blazing Heat, every 5 seconds, it pulses all players within 50 yards, and it does fire damage every second, just stacking fire dot. That stinks. Mm-hmm. But Corrupting Shadow, also 5-second pulse, 50 yards, shadow damage every 5 seconds, and reduces max health by 1%.
Oh, so you're saying you don't want to stand in the middle between both of them and try and fight them both at the same time. So you
definitely
get both dots.
Don't be in range of both of them. And the shadow one is a little bit worse because you have that max health reduction, which if you're really in phase 1 a long time can start causing a big problem as the kind of spiky damage comes in. But so your raid leader should split the group into teams, and you should stay with your team on your side. Now, if you are receiving dangerous levels of stacks of these debuffs, you should switch sides. The tanks probably need to keep the bosses in place, so they may need some attention if the phase is really dragging on. But, for squishier players who are getting above like 10, 12 stacks, you might want to call to swap sides if the bosses aren't close to transitioning.
Yeah, or there's a bit of personal responsibility there of dipping out for long enough that your stacks drop and just swapping bosses for that 8-9 seconds and then swapping back kind of idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could go a long way if you're having problems progressing through phase 1. We should also probably mention, I don't think we spelled this out specifically, but the way this fight works is you have these two elementals that we're talking about. They have separate health pools.
Yes. They do not share a health pool.
They do not share health pools, but when one of them reaches 50% health, they combine. You get the brief intermission, and then you have the amalgamation that the chamber is named after.
So
right?
phase 2, in other words.
Right. And so at that point, it will combine the health of the two adds into its health pool. So you want to DPS them down as evenly as possible. You don't want one to be at 80% and you nuke one to 50%. Now you're going to be in phase 2 way too long. Yep. You want to DPS them evenly and try to have that transition happen when they're both as close to 50% as you can get it before it kicks off. So keep that in mind in terms of group split, positioning, and when to switch sides. Maybe you want to call to have some higher DPS come help kill the higher health add. These are things to manage it in the moment, like in preparation and in the moment of combat with the boss. It'll be so much easier for you to kill the second boss, the amalgamated boss, if it's at 50% when it starts.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with Shadow, Essence of Shadow, phase 1. You get Coalescing Void is an ability where the boss marks a giant circle on the ground that's going to explode. Basically, it's that old mechanic of an orb falling from the sky that when it reaches the ground, it detonates and explodes and does a bunch of damage. You just want to move away from it. It's going to hit players within 50 yards, but you take reduced damage the farther away you are from it. So when you see the giant pulsing purple swirly, business happening, like you just move away from it and it explodes, and then you go back to doing what you're doing. Be sure when you're moving away, you aren't moving really into close range of the fire dude and getting a whole bunch of stacks of fire because you stayed far away after you moved away from the purple thing. So just, keep that in mind. Next one will be Umbral Detonation. This is where multiple players are marked with a circle, and after 6 seconds they explode and they drop a big puddle of purple goop that you don't want to stand in. So move to the edge of the room, drop your circle. You just did this on the previous boss. If you have an assigned area to drop them, that's great. Just keep that in mind. Similar thing. Shadow Spike, and Jason talked about this a bit, where it's a burst of damage that happens to the tank. Spell reflectable, very cool thing. Meanwhile, over on the fire side, the fiery meteor happens where the boss drops a massive meteor that has to be soaked. So on one side, you're running away from the big thing. On the fire side, you are basically seeing a big fire circle with one of those nice spikes in it, but it's like giant. It's like bigger than the boss. Move into that, stand in it, soak the meteor with everybody. We've done soaking meteors many times on different fights. Be sure you're soaking the meteor.
Yeah, one thing to point out here, again, limited experience with this so far, possibly anecdotal, but I believe that when it says the Eternal Blaze calls down a fiery meteor nearby, they literally mean that the thing basically casts this at its feet. It doesn't go on a player, and it doesn't seem to go very far from the boss at all. So if you're on Fireside, you have to be ready to dive in here. Like, you need to be close enough to the boss that you can get in that 8-yard circle that the boss is inevitably going to put near itself within like 3 seconds, give or take. So just keep that in mind. Not a huge deal. It's an obvious mechanic to soak, right? Like it is a Kill Jaden soak circle with the spike going through it. But like, the more the merrier in there. You want to split this damage up, and it is going to be pretty tight to the boss's position in my experience.
Yeah, similar thing with Coalescing Void. It basically drops at the boss's feet. It's just next to them, kind of idea. It's it's something that's not hard to miss. Swirling Flame is the next ability that the fiery ad does, where the boss turns towards a player and launches a wave of fire tornadoes. This is something you can actually technically dodge if you're far enough away, in the sense that it's a wave of tornadoes that start combined as one and split out into 4 that then get wider and wider and farther spread as it goes farther away, which means if this happens to, even though it shouldn't be pointed towards the shadow group and travel across the room, people can see it coming and dodge it. But generally speaking, you want to point this towards a wall so that you're not basically causing the other group to have to adjust their positioning based off of your ability that you could have just pointed towards a wall. So try to point this away from your shadowy friends that are fighting across the room.
Yeah, this one it doesn't I don't think it goes far enough where, like, if they're in a good position that they have to worry about it. It does face a player and it comes out pretty fast, so it can be kind of hard to react to, but there are pretty big gaps.
Yeah.
So definitely dodgeable, but it's kind of tough because, like, it's easier to dodge the farther away you are, right? But then you don't want to get too far away because you need to soak fiery meteor. So it's that kind of hokey pokey type of positioning you got to do with the fire boss a little bit.
Yeah, if you're relying on boss visuals, he sort of cocks his hand back as he's channeling it, and then puts his hand forward, and you actually see the tornadoes spawn on the ground, and then they start moving a quarter of a second later. So you do have time to react to, oh, he's pointing this direction, let's not be standing in front of him. Similar to like a dragon breathing in before it breathes fire. You're like, oh, hey, it's actually about to do something. I should probably not stand right where I'm standing. Just pay that one attention. You already talked about Flame Slash. That's happening there, but we can move on to Splintered Flames and Shadow Flame, which would be the intermission. So, Jason, what happens when you actually get both these dudes down to 50% or close to it?
Yeah, well, now it's intermission time.
Really.
The intermission is very brief. Should we talk about the heroic only mechanics in phase one before we move on?
Go for it. Yeah.
There's because each boss has one extra thing that they do in phase one on heroic. Shadow boss has Shadow's Convergence, which is a circle's going to go down a player, and a couple seconds later, the circle's going to pop, and then around the circle, orbs are going to spawn and sort of implode into where the player stood when the circle popped.
Yeah.
So if you were that player, you need to get away from the group and then be ready to run through the gap in the orbs. The faster you do it, the more room you have. If you are not one of those players, you need to probably get away from the people that have it. And again, like, your raid leader may want to designate, like, if you get that, run to the
star marker
left-hand wall, run to the back, run to the marker, like, spread them out over there and get them away from the group so that the orbs don't converge on people. Oh no, I'm sorry. In phase one, it happens at the boss itself. It's in phase two that it goes on
a
people.
Player. Okay.
Yeah. So in phase one, you just have to be aware of this, and you're going to have to reposition the boss potentially. And you probably want to stay, if you can stay outside of the range of this and shoot the boss, then you probably want to do that. If you are up in melee, just be aware that this is going to be going off. You're going to need to shoot the gaps, and the tank may have to shimmy out of it as well. So keep that in mind. The heroic mechanic for the fire boss is called Molten Eruption, and this is 1 per customer soak circles, I think. And I say that because this hurt really bad last night, like exceptionally bad. We had a group of about, call it 25. I think we had a couple more than that, so a pretty big group. We were getting 3 of these per cast. I was on Fireside, which is why I don't really know what happened on Shadow side. And yeah, like, I went and soaked 1, and then a couple other people soaked the other 2, and like, I took a hit, but you know, I'm a tank. I probably had Spell Reflect up or some other absorb or something. I was like, okay, and I think the other 2 people just like died. So this definitely hurts right now at our gear level. So you may want to sort of have people that have the consistent ability to throw up an absorb, or, you know, have people call to immunity or whatever. If they can get in there and ice block or turtle or something. I guess even like Cloak of Shadows would work because it's just straight fire damage. They need to be, if you don't soak all 3 of them, it does like a hit to all players that is not good. So
we've seen those before.
Yeah, and again, these seem to be around the boss's location. It didn't seem targeted at players. I would usually get them like in a triangle pretty close to the boss. So keep that in mind if you're on Fireside. And all of these mechanics will be involved in the second phase.
They will.
So once you push one of them to 50%, then you get, they actually put this in the encounter journal as intermission, the amalgamation.
Yeah.
This doesn't last very long. Calling this like a separate phase and intermission seems a little strange to me, but that's how they decided to describe it in the journal. Basically, like, the 2 elementals, one's going to channel Splintered Flames, one's going to channel Splintered Shadow, and there's going to be 10-yard area
Swirlies.
denial. Yeah, like dodge this or take a lot of damage circles all over the room for a few seconds. I don't know. It didn't seem like it lasted very long. And then they coalesce into a big Shadow Flame elemental, the Shadow Flame amalgamation. And this is where everything starts getting put together. This is where you have to kind of have mastered the dance for these mechanics and then, survive. And hopefully you are around 50%. You've done a good job splitting. You use heroism, time warp, bloodlust, evoker thing here because this is kill or be killed time. I mean, again, second boss, it's on the easier side, right? This boss is not designed as a roadblock. They're just showing off some mechanics and like testing your ability to coordinate the group. This is a killable boss, but the intensity ramps up quite a bit here in second phase. And so this is the time where you want to blast the boss down and get out of the fight before you die.
Yeah. So just to make sure that people just understand what phase 2 is when it comes to mechanics, you still get Gloom Conflagration, which is basically the massive meteor that's to be soaked by at least 5 people, right? That still happens. Still have Blistering Twilight, where you have to run out and drop the swirlies at the edge of the room. Only now, when those swirlies actually detonate, they launch little Shadow Flame tornadoes that move out from the 4 corners of the circle. I know I just used corners and circle inside the same thing, but that's literally how it works, is if you drew a square inside of the circle, you'd have each of those corners launch out shadow tornadoes that you have to dodge. You have the Shadow Flame Burst, which is a frontal cone that the tank sort of has to basically eat, deal with, dodge.
Well, let's talk about let's talk about phase 2 tanking, because there is a wrinkle that tanks need to be aware of. In phase 1, it's just like, okay, every once in a while, this thing's going to blast you for elemental damage, right? Like, no big deal. There's a combo, and it happens in the same sequence over and over again throughout phase 2, and it's dangerous if you don't handle it right. It's the first thing it's going to do at its current target is Withering Vulnerability.
Yep.
So it's a physical damage hit, but it increases your Shadow Flame damage taken by 200% for 10 seconds. It's then immediately going to do the Shadow Flame Burst cone attack, which does a staggering amount of Shadow Flame damage just baseline, let alone if you triple it with the vulnerability. Yeah. So what you want to do is have your tanks at like kind of that 45-degree angle split or whatever, however far apart you can safely get. The cone isn't super wide, but it's one of those things like we saw in, I don't know, Lords of Dread maybe, or what was the worm boss, Skolex and Sepulcher. Yeah. There was a couple things where it's like, okay, tanks need to be just like a little offset so that a narrow cone just goes at one of them.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the positioning you want to use here. The tanks shouldn't be on top of each other, because you need the active tank to bait the Withering Vulnerability, and then you need to quickly taunt and direct the Shadow Flame Burst away from the other tank.
Yeah.
Also, this is a cone. This will hit you if you are not a tank, but you are in the cone.
Do not be in front of the boss.
Do not stand on your tanks. Do not stand behind your tanks. You use the other part of the room, and then you will not die to Shadow Flame Burst, and you'll be happy.
Yeah, Shadow Flame Burst takes up maybe a 15-degree cone. You have the other big chunk of the room that you can stand in that you don't have to be in this one. And then the last thing to deal with in this phase is Shadow Flame Contamination, where basically because we're all just exposed to Shadow Flame from this elemental that's going on, we're just receiving this like constant stacking damage, and at the same time our maximum health is being reduced. So we're essentially melting away from both sides as this fight happens, which is why Jason talked about, hey, getting them both down as close to 50% as possible before you push one to 50% and enter this phase, and also using heroism during that back half of this fight to make sure you're not sitting in this phase for too long. Otherwise, you will just melt because of Shadow Flame Contamination. Yeah.
Yep. Now, basically the gimmick here is that in phase 2, like you'll notice, the shadow and flame mechanics from phase 1 get combined and happen at the same time as like shadow flame mechanics. So, as you kind of get more familiar with how the mechanics work, then you will be able to handle them kind of simultaneously, right? Like, now the meteor comes out, and then after the meteor split, then the fall off damage vacuum thing happens. So you stack and then you run away instead of like one side stacking, one side running away.
Yeah. Same thing with the frontal with the 4 tornadoes is now attached to the circle that you have to drop. Run out and drop the circle. And now as opposed to the boss shooting out a frontal of 4 tornadoes, they come out from those 4 corners of the square I talked about inside of the circle.
Yeah. So it's probably a good idea to maybe split your group up, like mix it up a little bit, from week to week, and just have people like on different sides if you think of it, so that everybody gets used to seeing the mechanics more often and being able to handle them. I think in a way it's kind of like better almost. I feel like the combined mechanics to be able to deal with them, because it's like, okay, we all stack now, we all know exactly where to run away from. The vacuum thing, the fall off shadow damage, can be kind of hard to see in the call out, and I almost feel like having the shadow flame thing pop and then do the tornadoes is like a bit easier to deal with than having the boss just kind of randomly turn around and shoot them at people. Like I mean, I wasn't dealing. It's shooting the fire tornadoes away from me, right? So yeah. I didn't really have to handle it because it's turning around and shooting them in the other direction. But it seemed to me like that seemed like a harder mechanic to dodge than like, okay, it's going to come from here, right? Like,
yeah,
that was just kind of my feeling about it. Now on Heroic, we didn't get this far last night, so I couldn't see it. But now it does, like, okay, the Soki circles, the one per customer circles.
Yeah, the meteors that come down from the sky. Not the big meteor, but the little ones.
No, the ones that you just want one person per in and that rock you at the moment. Like, you want one person each of those, but then when they hit, then it's going to do the orb implosion thing.
Yeah.
So those people, like, you need to get away from wherever that is. Don't hang out near there.
And don't run towards your friends who just had one either. So you might be running away from yours into somebody else's. Yeah.
Yeah, like everybody needs to be aware of like where these things are set up and positioned accordingly. But like overall, I think this is a cool way to do like a 2-target fight that then, I mean, really this is like a single target fight, even though there's 3 different targets. But it's kind of a cool way to do these bosses that combine these elements, and then just building on the theme of like, okay, we're going to teach you how to do half of these mechanics depending on which side you're on, and then we're going to combine it, and then you're going to do all the mechanics at once. Like I like that kind of thing, especially when the execution bar is relatively low, and I feel like it is here. I mean, on normal, this was a cakewalk for our group. It was just fun. I had a really good time with this fight. Heroic, it is a bit more. I mean, we pulled it like twice, I think. I think it's killable this week for our group. Certainly, it doesn't seem like a particularly hard fight. We shouldn't have any time.
Yeah,
but it's definitely a bit of a step up. I mean, you can just tell from the conversation we're having about it. From Kizara is just like, okay, the gimmick is the laser into the portal. Just do that and win. This fight requires a bit more coordination from your group overall, and the throughput checks they kick in here to a degree that they don't on Kizara. But overall I think the conception of the fight is really cool, and again, like the whole like really selling this fantasy of the Shadow Flame concept, I think comes through really strong here. In the stuff you're fighting, and as well as in their abilities, it looks really cool. And yeah, I don't know. This is a pretty fun fight, and it's a cool way to do this concept of like merging 2 smaller bosses into a bigger one. I had a good time with it last night.
It's a neat concept with basically accepting conceptually what Shadow Flame is and how it's made, and creating that out of elementals was a neat idea. So yeah, I think it's done well. Like I said, on LFR, this felt like a big trash mob that you were fighting. It was very strange to not really feel like there were super strong mechanics happening. But yeah, when you actually sort of go through the fight and how the mechanics are supposed to be done and how you can see them ramp onto Heroic and into Mythic difficulty, I think there's a really neat boss here for sure. Okay, well, let's move on to the last boss of this wing, the Forgotten Experiments. Basically, the development of the Drakthir produced many iterations, some more successful than others. Early versions of these experiments proved far too volatile to destroy. Kept dormant for thousands of years, these creations have now awakened, and they seek to test their prowess against the champions of Azeroth. So, okay, this is one of those dual boss things, but it also really, there's only one boss that I found was super crazy, ultra dangerous. So, Jason, why don't you talk a little bit about phase 1 where we fight Neldris, but we'll start off by the room. What does this room look like?
This room, off the top of my head, I feel like this room is somewhat like rectangular, kind of.
It's like an octagon.
It's like kind of long. Yeah, it's a bit longer than it is wide, I feel like.
Yeah.
You have this sort of like texture on the floor that sort of it sort of demarcates like, okay, this is about where you want to fight this boss.
Yeah, it kind of tells you. Everything points towards a circle in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, like positioning, I felt like was not mega important for most of this fight, except for one particular ability where if you're out of position, you will die.
Well, two of them, but yes, we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, one really big one for sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the tank mechanic here, because this is, I don't know how to describe this. I want to say it's a council style fight because there's 3 bosses, but you only ever fight one boss at a time.
Yeah.
It's a pure single target fight. Even with the ads that pop in from the phase 2 debuff, you just have to single target those and kill them. Like, there's not like sustained periods of fighting more than one target. And, I kind of famously dislike council fights. So having a quote unquote council fight where you fight one different boss at a time is cool with me.
It's the best iteration of a council fight. I agree.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Like, go ahead, bring in some texture, have mechanics that carry over from boss to boss, but don't make me manage 3 or 4 mobs for, 8 minutes. So let's talk about the tank mechanic, because this is the same. All 3 bosses do the same thing.
Good.
So we're not going to talk about it for every single boss, because they all do this. It's the same debuff. It's the same mechanic. You handle it the same way. So tanks just know this. They cast Infused Strikes. And I think this is... Actually, I don't think it's a cast so much as it's like an aura or a buff that they have, and it's just a consequence of their melee swings. So their melee attacks inflict arcane damage, and they leave like an arcane damage dot.
Yeah.
And it's a stacking dot. Now, the only way to remove this dot, it's not on a timer. The only way to remove this dot is to touch another player that also has Infused Strike stacks. This removes all stacks that both of the players who are touching each other have, which is good. It causes an Infused Explosion, which is bad. Infused Explosion does arcane damage raid-wide. All players take the arcane damage and take a 20-second arcane damage dot from this explosion. So what this means is your 2 tanks do not want to stand on top of each other for the entire fight and are constantly just like removing each other's Infused Strike stacks at 1 or 2. You will kill your raid with unending Infused Explosion dots. So don't do that. Again, you want to take that kind of split tanking position, just slightly off from each other, like we were just doing for phase 2 Amalgamation Chamber. And what we were finding was somewhere between 6 and 9 stacks was feeling okay to swap off around, somewhere in there. But keep in mind, like, you want both tanks to have like 7, 8, 9 stacks, maybe 8 stacks, we'll call it. So that it takes kind of a while actually for the boss to land like 15, 16, 18, 20 melee swings. And remember, it's going to clear the debuff from like both players. So you really don't have to swap around that much. It's like half the swapping you would have for a normal tank. I can't remember them ever doing a tank mechanic like this, but like the rhythm is a little bit different because you want these to stack up kind of high. Because you don't want to be doing this Infused Explosion all the time.
You want to be doing it at most once every 21 seconds. Because you want to leave 20-second gaps between each of them, right? So the frequency is never less than 20 seconds apart, basically.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you need time for all that to tick off and for healers to get caught up. And, you can control when this pops, right? So, like, you don't want to... If some other mechanics went out and people are low, like if you can hold it, pop a personal, like you're a tank, use your tanking stuff to like hang in there, let your healers catch up and then pop it, it's unique. I don't remember any tank mechanics working like this.
It's a cool tank mechanic. It feels like a lot more controllable raid damage as to what's happening, which is
it is. You have a lot of leeway to figure out like how you want to handle this and when the right time is to pop it for your group. So use that to your advantage, work it out with the other tank and communicate with your healers, check your raid frames and be smart about it. And you can really feel like you have some agency over this mechanic and to help your raid out to do it well. So I think it's a cool design, but just keep that in mind, don't stack up and just don't stack up, I guess. You can go nuts swapping the boss around if you really want to, right? Because all that matters is when you collide, like it could go back and forth and just apply 2 stacks at a time, or whenever, your taunt is back up, if you wanted to do it that way. Is kind of micromanaging it. But you know what? If that's what works for your group, you could do it. You're not going to be punished by the mechanic. It's up to you to decide when the debuff pops.
Yeah, I think the only factor that could come into play there is if, depending on who your healers are, they're better at focusing on a single target, single tank for healing, because obviously you are building up the stacking dot on yourself. And so if you're spreading that between the two of you and you're both getting, 5 or 6 stacks before you actually clear that, or 9 stacks before you clear that, it might be too much consistent damage on 2 targets at the same time, for depending on who your healers are, to be able to handle that kind of damage. So that is the one touch and feel where it might be easier to throw a pain suppression or something like that, or a bark skin on a tank, an iron bark on a tank, who's taking the higher amount of stacks than it is to try and deal with both at the same time. That's the only thing I can think about. But starting off in this room, you're going to fight Neldris first. Neldris has an ability that we have seen many times before, and I always dislike on every boss that I see it on, regardless of dungeon or raid, called Rending Charge, where Neldris marks a few players and then dashes through them, dealing damage and applying a 15-second bleed to them and any players hit inside the trajectory. Last really memorable boss that I remember having this was Stone Legion Generals, where actually this was an iteration of it that I actually kind of enjoyed versus the one that we see here on Neldris. Whereas only 2 players as opposed to a few players, and you just have those 2 players move out. They basically had to be sure that the boss was going to move to one of them, then to the other one, then back into the group where the tank is, and that no one was inside that path but them. Otherwise, they were getting this big old bleed on them as well. With this targeting multiple players, sometimes it's hard to tell who he's going to go to first. That person can end up going to the middle between the other 2 or 3 or 4 players that are happening. And it means that he then charges to the right and then back across the person who was first to the left. They get 2 stacks of the bleed, and it sucks. So just as a heads up, whenever designing these Rending Charge things, I'd love it if, as opposed to having red arrows over people's head, they had numbers that floated over the person's head. So you knew who was 1, 2, and 3, so you could tell where he was going first. That would be really nice. I think there probably is something where the boss targets the person, you can see them in the target frame quickly, but adjusting position on the fly like that can be tricky. So just keep in mind, basically, when Rending Charge is happening, if you're one of the people who has the floating red arrows over your head, you want to have either a designated spot for these people to move out to, which is probably ideal, or if you're in an LFR situation, just move out of the group to a side where there aren't a lot of people around, so that he charges outwards to you, and then hopefully you're standing there with the other 2 people who have the markers, or 3 people who have the markers, so he charges through those people as well. You don't want to have you guys form a triangle that's close to the boss, so he essentially charges through all of the melee multiple times and just wipes your raid. So just, that's Rending Charge. It's not something new that we've seen, but it's back, so being sure you're dealing with it right is important. This was the second ability I talked about that could be really dangerous if you didn't have positioning right.
Yeah, that's true. This could be. Yeah. I would highly recommend, have your raid leader should designate an area, like a quadrant on the ground. Like again, there's like a big texture on the floor. Like use that to maybe pick a spot where they're gonna, group up in some way. You don't want to be on top of each other. And yeah, you do want to make kind of a triangle in case, it jumps to the middle of the stack first, and then all 3 players get hit with the first one or something. You don't want that. Yeah. Or you don't want the person stuck in the middle to get hit first and then get hit like 2 more times as it dashes back and forth. So yeah, get off to one side, make a triangle, keep everybody away from there, and you'll be okay. It's obnoxious, and of course it leaves the bleed. Like these things always have to make you bleed. Yep. It's it's like if we could just take that out, then a little oopsie probably wouldn't be as bad.
Not nearly as bad, yeah.
Yeah, like bleeds are so hard to deal with, but it's a Rending Charge, and so you get rended. So get out, get off to the side, get out of the way, and if you're not the target, like you should be aware too of where these players are. You should be looking for those, red arrows at people's heads or whatever the marker is that the game uses.
Yeah, it's this red floating arrow.
Yeah, like give them room. Yeah, it's like an inverted chevron. Like, give them room to, get charged upon and leave you out of it. Like everybody, when it comes to these types of positioning mechanics, like the leadership, the raid leader needs to designate a place to go. The targets need to make sure that they're there, but also everybody else has a responsibility to make sure they don't get clipped. So just know where you're supposed to be in the room.
Yeah. Next ability you're going to be dealing with is one that you actually just saw in a previous boss. It's called Massive Slam. It's a large frontal cone that happens towards players. This case, it's brown. So as opposed to being a shadowy one or a fiery one or a breath that's going to be happening, this is a slam. He's going to hit the ground. It's 15 to 20 degree arc. It's probably closer to 20 to 25 degree arc. Don't stand in it. You have like 3 seconds to get out of it when you start seeing it happening. So just don't stand in it, and then you're fine. It does always happen towards a random player, so it can just face in any direction around the room. So you just have to be ready. And it's always easier to move out of something that is a cone if you are closer to the boss. The distance you have to travel is shorter when you're closer to the boss. So just keep that in mind as well. Of drifting out to the far edge of the room and hugging a wall means you're probably going to have to run a lot farther if this targets you or someone standing next to you than if you're standing closer to the boss inside the situation. Also, that puts you in danger of the rending thing. So you don't want to be far out because maybe you're just messing up people's rend stuff if that's happening. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. I mean, for this boss, like, there is we didn't get there yet, but there's a mechanic to run away from. But other than that, like, you should be pretty close to the boss, because if you're closer to the boss, then you make it easier for rending charge targets to get to their designated spot safely. It makes it easier for you to get away from them. It makes it much easier for you to avoid Massive Slam. Mm-hmm. So yeah, don't be 40 yards away in a random direction from the rest of the group, just hoping that you're going to be safe there. You kind of want to have a clump on one side of the room, and then you're directing traffic the other way out of rending charge, and then you're set up in a good spot for people to get away from Massive Slam. And yeah, I mean, you do have the Bellowing Roar complication to that, but again, it's like a hokey pokey thing. Get out of it, run back into where you just were.
Yeah. So Bellowing Roar is the move. Basically, it's a big shout that if the boss is standing in the very center circle of the room, basically fills up that center circle of the room. So if you're in that center circle of the room, move out of the center circle of the room when he's, that kind of distance, wait for the roar to finish, and then you can move back in if you want. It's really not that huge of a radius. Yes, it does have drop-off damage. It hits everyone in the raid. And yes, it does more damage the farther away you are, but your raid can handle a reasonable distance on this on most difficulties. So I wouldn't say you have to run to the edge of the room to try and reduce the damage as most as possible. You can be 25 yards away, 30 yards away, and be fine. So don't stress over like, I gotta bolt all the way out. Oh no, I got the claws. I'm not way out of position. I have to bolt all the way back in. Oh, there's the slam. I'm running through the slam. This is bad. Like, you're just going to create issues for yourself. So yes, this is one of those cases where the farther away, the less damage you take. But at a certain point, it's like, okay, we have healing cooldowns for this exact situation, right? The other abilities are bleeds. We're managing bleeds on multiple targets. There's a roar that's going to happen. It's really the only big raid-wide damage thing that's going to happen outside of, spot healing a lot of individual things with tanks having dots and people having bleeds. So yeah, it's that is the first boss. He does that until you kill him, and then he dies, and then you move on to the second boss. The second boss is Thadrion. This boss is another one of the dragon experiments, and starts off, I guess, with an ability called Unstable Essence. Since we've already covered tank mechanics, we don't have to cover what you have to do as far as the tank swap stuff happens. Unstable Essence is that he regularly applies a permanent dot on players that constantly stacks. Dispelling it makes it jump to a new player and reset stacks. Dispelled players drop a circle that explodes a few seconds later. Basically, if you're going to be dealing with dots throughout the entirety of phase 2, and they're all going to disappear when he dies. So the problem here is if you have too many people dispelling at the same time, and you have way too many circles appearing that people can't actually get out of before they explode. That's really what it comes down to. The circles that they drop are like the size of the center of the room or close to it, that same sort of circle size. So you want to be sure these players who are getting dispelled aren't, standing in melee the entirety of the time here. You want to be sure these people who get this dot before they get dispelled are moving out, and that maybe they have a buddy that they're passing this thing around to, or at least someone who's designated to have it passed to, who knows what to do with it. This is one of those mechanics where you can control what to do with it. So you want to basically have this dot land on somebody, dispel it as late as possible when this person's farther outside of the group, and then you just repeat this, and more people are going to get it, and you're going to have to keep dodging the circles that they're dropping.
Yeah, this mechanic basically is the whole fight. I feel like this is the thing you really have to manage.
Yeah.
For this boss, yes. I mean, the other bosses have stuff that will kill you or whatever, but like they're not this kind of persistent threat that that Unstable Essence sort of represents. I would recommend using your hero Time Warp Bloodlust on this boss, because more Unstable Essences will go out over time.
Yeah. You run out of
it
spells.
Takes a while, at least on normal. Like it takes a while for it to kind of ramp up, but like it happens. So you want to be fighting this boss for the least amount of time possible. Also on heroic, the Dispel spawns an ad, and the ad does like a channeled burst of damage to the raid, and you have to swap targets and kill that. And also, Unstable Essence never goes away even after you kill this boss. So you really want to nuke this down if you're doing heroic and up. The thing with Unstable Essence is like you don't want to snap dispel this like ever.
Yeah.
You want this to stack up as high as you could possibly stand it, so that you don't have to deal with this 12-yard explosion and jump into another player as frequently. You know, the fewer times you could do this, the better, because it is disruptive, and you're never going to get rid of it, right? Like it's just, I mean, maybe if it's on somebody who's particularly squishy or something, or maybe they got like a low health pool, then maybe it's beneficial to get it off of them faster, but it kind of will naturally happen that way anyway. It'll just be lower stacks where it becomes not as manageable. So
yeah,
it's a dangerous mechanic for sure, and that's why it probably behooves you to make sure you have all of your biggest buttons ready to go when Thadrian comes down, and get out of this phase as fast as you can. Because you don't want Unstable Essences going off all the time, disrupting the raid, ticking on people, all that. Just get it over with. Just kill this boss.
Yeah, so on top of dodging the swirlies that are being dropped by this Dispel, there's more swirlies you need to dodge, which are very obvious classic swirlies that come from Volatile Spew. So basically just, there's a cast that the boss does that's very obvious because it takes like 3 seconds for him to cast, so you know it's coming, that just launches a whole bunch of projectiles throughout the room and causes a whole bunch of swirlies to happen. So it's just, when this is happening, you just move out of the swirlies. You probably have about 1.5 seconds or so to recognize what's happening and move. So you do have to be paying attention so you don't get hit by all these things. But they are maybe 5 yards in diameter, so they're not hard to get out of. But they are something that you have to move to, probably actually closer to 8. But yeah, they're not hard to get out of, but you have to actually pay attention and move to get out of them. It's kind of like a non-mechanic in the sense that you just have to dodge. It's not complicated. It doesn't add a twist to anything. As long as you're not dodging into where a dispel is happening and there's a circle on the ground, you're fine. Last ability is Violent Eruption, where regularly Theridian starts to channel and just deal damage to the whole raid. It's just like it's your healing cooldown button. It's why using Heroism in this phase is nice as well, because you're going to have to deal with fewer Violent Eruptions, where people just take arcane damage every second for 8 seconds as this pulsing happens. 8 seconds conveniently is most healing cooldowns, or close to it. So this starts and you hit Tranquility. Now that is great as long as someone isn't running a circle out on top of you and dispelling on top of you, or you're not being dispelled while you are channeling your thing that you can't move while channeling. So keep that in mind as well. If you have healers lined up to use cooldowns in a good way, probably good they don't have this debuff when they're actually going into doing that healing cooldown. It's also impossible for a healer to actually focus healing themselves while they're channeling something like this, and that's also how a lot of healers die, is they hit their big healing cooldown and they don't receive enough external healing to keep them alive while they're doing the big healing cooldown. So they end up dying. So it's good to be sure this is off of the healers who are doing that when they're actually dealing with Violent Eruption in some way or another. And there is a heroic part to this one, where Erratic Remnants inflict arcane damage to all players during Violent Eruption. Jason, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, so remember, Erratic Remnants are the things that spawn from dispelling Unstable Essence on heroic. Mm-hmm. So this is tough. Like I I don't know if there's an energy bar on this boss or if you just got to like watch for timers. Because ideally, what you would do would be to dispel whatever's out there before Violent Eruption in time to clean up the erratic remnants, so you're not getting that extra damage, and you have players at relatively low stacks of Unstable Essence. Because you don't really want to dispel those like during Violent Eruption, and then you have like fresh arcane or erratic remnants that are now also damaging you during this high damage period of time. So
Yeah.
you got to watch the timing on this a little bit, because the erratic remnants are super high priority when they're out. So make sure they are getting nuked down, like just single target nuke them and kill them and make them go away and make them stop damaging you, and then get back to what you were doing. So
Yeah.
definitely some timing concerns here. I mean, much like the tank mechanic with the debuff, you have a lot of options for how you handle it, but you have to keep in mind that you will have these overlaps. So use your dispels wisely.
Yep. Okay, phase 3, where you fight Ryanthus. And so this is your Drakthir, I guess is the best way to describe it, is the more classic player Drakthir that you're used to. You have to deal with Temporal Anomaly, where regularly Ryanthus spawns a ball that slowly moves towards him. If it reaches him, he gets 10% health as an Absorb Shield, and players can bump the ball to knock it away, which deals some damage to them. So basically you just keep bumping the ball before it actually reaches the boss, and it goes away, and he doesn't get a big Absorb Shield, and you take a little bit of damage for bumping the ball. So have fun playing soccer as far as this goes, and keep away. That's basically what this is for this mechanic.
It seems it's a little more volatile seeming than because the most recent boss, I guess it had something like this, was like Halandris, right? It had the orbs that would come out of the portals, and you would kind of position yourself so the orb would just kind of bump into you, and that was fine. These they seem to be a bit more mobile than those were. They seem to move a bit farther and like with some momentum.
Yeah, they move a bit more like a ball, to be honest.
Yeah. So you kind of have to be aware of that. And also, unlike Halandris, which was just kind of sitting there, this boss will move around, and you will get more of these as the fight progresses. So you got to make sure that people are paying attention, right? And able to, you can't really just designate one person to do this for the entire fight, because you don't know where the boss is going to end up. And that could be really bad. You don't want the boss to absorb this thing. That's a big Absorb Shield.
It is.
That sucks. We don't want to deal with that. So
Yeah.
everybody's got to be bought in on like, okay, we're all working together to make sure that these temporal anomalies get knocked away from the boss. This mechanic doesn't read super well. This looks like a lot like the thing that Evokers cast. So that could be a bit confusing. It's a little subtle graphically, so just make sure everybody knows what to look for and that everybody is participating, because otherwise you're just wasting your own time in this phase, and that's no fun. You want to kill the boss. You don't want to be punching an Absorb Shield.
Yeah, it's a golden orb that's like the size of a gnome that travels towards the boss.
Right. It's like the sand graphic, right? Like, it's like the bronze dragon magic looking thing.
Exactly.
But it looks very much like the thing that Evokers already cast, so it can be a little confusing.
Yeah. Next ability is Disintegrate. Go figure, and you're fighting an Evoker thing, and it uses Disintegrate. Basically, Ryanthus channels a beam on a few players. These players are marked with a circle around their feet, which slows them down, and when the beam hits them and they take damage, and it damages anyone around them. So if you get circles around your feet, because you're being targeted by Disintegrate, move out. Be sure you're not stacked up with other players. You can overlap the circles, just don't overlap other players. And this channel will happen, and people take damage, so they'll need healing. So yeah, that's that one. And then the last one is the big ability that Jason talked about at the very beginning. That is, hey, this will actually just wipe your raid, and you'll wipe in the last phase and the last boss in a council fight, which always sucks. It's called Deep Breath, where Ryanthus goes to the edge of the room. If the room is a little bit longer than it is wide, it's the lengthwise that this breath will run, and just runs up and down the center of the room. And the width of this thing is basically the width of the circle in the center of the room, which means if you drew straight lines along, the lengthwise of the room on either side of the circle, you got to be outside of those lines, so that you're not within the center of the room at all to take damage from this, because he will fly all the way down the center of the room once, and then turn around, and then fly all the way back across the center of the room again. So there's technically 3 possible lanes that he can fly over. On LFR, for me, he only flew down the middle of the room. He could choose one of the sides, but you know the width of it now, so the hardest one to dodge is the one in the center because it takes up, you know, the majority of the room. If this boss goes to the left side or the right side, just you moving to the left side or the right side is fine, right? It's very obvious how far you need to move. In the center, this thing is deceivingly wider than the graphic is. It's probably 5 yards on either side wider than the graphic is. And so you will get wrecked if you get hit by this thing. So definitely dodge the deep breath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is probably the most like straight up dangerous thing in the whole fight because it just does so much damage. And it can be a little bit hard to read like exactly where the boss is going to breathe. There are, I guess, like 3 lanes, right? Technically, that it's going to go down. And I don't think, again, very limited experience with the fight. I didn't see it choose the same lane twice. So I think you can probably know where one of the safe lanes is going to be after it breathes once. The other thing I would say about this is, in general, like the ramping, like really tense part of the fight is phase 2, Thadrian, like getting out of that boss with the ramping debuff. Rionthus is dangerous, but it doesn't have any kind of real ramp. So if you need to miss some uptime to make sure that you're way out of deep breath, do that. Because you will, if you die to deep breath, now you have no uptime. If you take 3 extra seconds to run an extra 20 yards or whatever, and you're safe from deep breath, and then you turn around and shoot the boss and kill it, then you win. So, like, just be as safe as you possibly can be. It can be a little bit hard to read, like, exactly where it's going to breathe. But if you get as far away as you can, then you will probably be safe and you can continue to DPS the boss. So that's my raid leader. Don't worry about your parse, attitude here for like learning this fight and succeeding at it.
Yeah. To emphasize how dangerous this ability is, the only heroic thing they did for this particular boss in the council fight is that they made temporal anomaly give him 5% more shield. So if the orb actually reaches him, he gets 15% health as an absorb shield, as opposed to 10%. That's the only heroic thing they did for this boss. And I think that is literally because of how damaging and wipe-threatening Deep Breath can be in this fight, that having an additional twist here at the end for heroic just wasn't worth it. Obviously in Mythic, you're going to get different twists, but yeah. Well, we don't cover the Mythic stuff on this show all that often. Okay, man, oh man. So that is the first wing. That is, the discarded works that players can work their way through right now on LFR if they want, or head out there in normal, heroic, and mythic and start knocking out these bosses. Overall, I think it's a great first wing. I think the culmination of this boss at the end with the council fight done this way, where you fight individuals, your way through, is really nicely done. I think this is a good first capper. This is where you get Tear Gloves, is off of the Forgotten Experiments. So I think this is a good first wing. I think it's a great way to start it off.
I agree. I had a great time in this raid last night, and I think these bosses really set the stage. They're very cool, very, very thematically appropriate for what we're dealing with the story of this whole patch and this raid and everything. They look great. I think most of the mechanics read really well, and you can kind of just learn the fights by doing them. And I think that is crucial especially for lower difficulty, raid settings like LFR and normal. Like, it should be obvious what to do and what not to do. You shouldn't need weak auras and DBM and a million guides. And I mean, like, it's good to have the information. Knowledge is power, but like a casual player should be able to stroll in here and figure out, okay, stand in this, don't stand in that, avoid this, stack up for that, whatever, and kill the boss and maybe get a cool reward. Like, that's the kind of experience that I think we want. I'm so over, the Sepulchre or the first ones type of design philosophy. And I think Vault of the Incarnates was a great raid. Like, it really was. Like, I think very highly of Vault of the Incarnates. And there's kind of that, you have that maybe trepidation of like, well, how's the next one going to be? Yeah, we dialed it back to Earth for the first raid of the expansion, but what are they going to do next time? And I feel like, having seen what I've seen so far, I feel like that they have stuck to the philosophy and the precedent that Vaulted Incarnate's kind of set. This feels like a natural extension of that style of raiding, and I'm pleased. That's exactly what I want. You know, I want to hang out with my WoW friends and have fun and kill bosses, and not have. I mean, the Anduin brick wall. You know,
Yeah.
I don't want to ever have that again. That wasn't fun, and it wasn't fun for a really long time. And having fun, I think, is the number one way I would sum up night one in Aberrus, and I'm excited to see more of it and sort of kind of master these fights and get it under our belts and move up the difficulty ranks. It's a really cool raid so far, and these bosses seem like they should be very approachable options in LFR this week.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm looking forward to talking about the next wing in a couple of weeks. If you folks have enjoyed this episode, then, definitely head on over to your iTunes and Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star. We appreciate it. But another great way you can support the show is by heading over to our Patreon. And I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons. They contribute a ton to our show and help us to improve on the content we create. And I'm giving a special shout out today to Arajian, Celian, Kapawi, Max, and Shorel. Thank you so much for all the support that all of our patrons give to our show. You can find us over at patreon.com/thestartingzone. And a big shout out and thank you to our newest patrons, Mekio and Sirac Obama. Thank you so much for jumping in and helping out the show. We appreciate you all giving towards the Patreon and helping us keep the show on the rails and running.
I assume both legal names in these cases.
Yes.
So yes, but thank you for your support. It's incredible. It means a lot to us. It helps us. Yeah. Like you said, I mean, it would be extremely hard to keep the show running on a weekly basis and to the standard that people expect it to be without Patreon support. We've been doing this it's going to be 7 years in a couple months that it's been you
Crazy.
and me doing the show pretty consistently week in and week out. It doesn't, in some ways it doesn't feel like it. And in some ways it's like only 7 years. So it just feels like a lifetime, right? It's just, we've done so many episodes of the show and we've been very, very consistent over the years. And the patrons are vital to that consistency. I don't think it would be possible without them. So thank you all so much. Welcome aboard, new patrons. And thank you for supporting the show, and get in there and do some Aberrus this week. And hopefully doing this big old audio guide will help.
Yeah, hopefully. And like I said, those 5 stars do help us out. We like to read them here on the show. So if you do head over to your iTunes and Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star. We will read it here. This one comes in from MMO89 entitled Great Podcast. Been listening to this podcast since COVID started, and now I can't wait for the weekly episodes. I get most of my WoW news from these guys. Well, I'm so glad that we can be your source for what's going on right now in the game. We do have these longer episodes on the weeks where we do boss guides because we just sort of dovetail them onto the end of our normal episodes. And we'll be, chatting about more stuff next week when that all kicks off. So we'll, I think next week we're actually doing a Tuesday. I think it's going to be crazy. I think there might actually be a Tuesday record next week.
What? I don't know how to handle that at this point.
We'll see what happens. Anyways, so if thanks very much for leaving us that 5-star review, MMO89.
Yeah, and also always great to hear from the international audience. I forgot to put this in notes, but this came in from Australia.
Oh, sweet.
And so super cool. It's always cool to hear from anybody outside of North America. And of course, the Australian, Blizzard audience is very so passionate and awesome. So thank you so much for writing in, especially after all this time. I mean, since COVID started, it's 3+ years now. So thanks for sticking with us, and thanks for checking in. Great to hear from you.
Yeah. That's going to wrap up episode 577 of The Starting Zone. If you want to check out show notes for this episode or leave us a comment on the show, you can head on over to your web browser. You can find us on our website at thestartingzone.com. If you want to leave some feedback, oh my goodness, or ask us a question, you can email us at thestartingzone@gmail.com. You can tell I've been talking for over 2 hours. And then reach out to us on Twitter at The Starting Zone, or on Discord. You can join our Discord over at thestartingzone.com/Discord. If you want to get your hands on some TSZ gear, you can find that over at TeePublic. That's teepublic.com/stores/thestartingzone. And you can check out everything on shirts and mugs and stickers and all that kind of fun stuff. And Jason, if people are trying to find you online, where can they find you streaming for your drops?
Yes, if you would like some drops, I have a free mount that you can have if you come watch me stream WoW over on twitch.tv/Shieldwald. I also have a channel at youtube.com/Shivwall, but that channel will be dormant for this week because if you're watching me, you should be getting progress for a drop. The mount's pretty cool. It's an old trading card game mount.
Yeah.
And so watch 4 hours of any WoW category streams and you can get it. But I will be streaming tonight for Raid. We'll be stepping back into normal and maybe heroic, depending on how stuff goes. We'll be doing some keystones. Sunday night as well. Streams are Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Sundays, 7:30 Eastern. And we will be back on schedule for the foreseeable here since we have new content to do and new goals to knock out. So come hang out for that. And I don't know, there might be more like, we have to evaluate what the Keystone schedule is going to look like and who's doing Keystones when. So we may be adding some time on. If I'm going to sit down and do Keystones, I might throw the stream on for that.
Nice.
So, check it out and, come say hi over on Twitter. Anytime I have streams coming up, I'll post about it on there too. So come check it out.
And trying to find me, you can find my socials on Twitter at Spencer_Downey, or over on Twitch at twitch.tv/SpencerHD, or on YouTube at youtube.com/@SpencerHD. And with that, for Jason and myself, we want to say thanks for listening, and jobs done.